The first toll of the gloam bell always sounded like a hand closing around the throat of the world. It rolled through Evernight streets in a low, bronze tremor, felt more than heard, shaking mist from eaves and loosening soot from chimneys that would never finish burning down. The city answered the bell with the same practiced exhale, shutters opened on the same count, a cartwheel squealed on the same cobble, someone laughed too loudly in the same alley, as if laughter could keep the sky from noticing there was no dawn. Rhovan Sairn stood at the narrow window of his rooms above a shuttered apothecary and watched it all begin again. Below, the lamplighters moved with lantern poles like long-necked birds, tapping the glass domes that hung over the street. Their flames were already lit, always lit, because they would never have time to fully go out before the day was taken back. A woman in a grey cloak crossed the corner with a basket of bitterleaf buns. A boy with a chipped tooth ran after her, calling the same plea he had called 1,000 times, and she answered with the same indulgent scold, smiling in precisely the same way. Rhovan could have told you the next 3 minutes of the street by heart. He pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist, where a faint band of pale ink circled his skin like an old scar. The mark warmed at the bell's toll, a reminder that the day was tethered to him as tightly as a collar. Anchor, the Vespers had called him. He let his hand fall, turned away from the window, and took the kettle from the stove. Water in the kettle shivered in a way water never should, quivering as if it remembered being boiled and couldn't decide whether to be cold. He set it down without lighting the flame. Tea had no taste on days like this if he let himself think about it. On the table lay 3 objects arranged with careful precision, a coin stamped with the crest of House Vesper, a shard of glass no longer than his thumb, and a folded scrap of paper with 1 sentence written in his own hand. Don't waste the 3rd hour. He didn't need to read it. The words were as familiar as his own name. He had written them in a moment of exhaustion 2 years into the loop, when he had still believed there would be a tomorrow to warn. Now the paper was an artifact of stubborn habit, a ritual like breathing. Rhovan slipped the coin into his pocket, tucked the glassen shard into a leather sleeve at his belt, and pulled on his coat. Its seams were mended so many times he could not remember what it had looked like new, if it had ever been new in the first place. The city's damp cold lived in its fibers, and when he moved the fabric creaked faintly, like old parchment. He left the room and descended the stairs, passing the apothecary's darkened shelves. The owner had been dead for 72 loops, depending on how you counted death when time refused to keep it. In the first year, Rhovan had tried to save him. He had held pressure to the man's chest, threaded a steadying knot of breath into his lungs, kept him alive until the 10th hour. At 13th midnight, the gloam bell had taken everything back, and the apothecary had died again in the same coughing fit before midday. Some endings did not accept correction. The loop had its preferences. Outside, Evernight pressed close, a city built inward against a sky that never turned. Smoke and sea salt mingled in the air. Somewhere beyond the walls, the marshes breathed their sour rot. The night wreath arced above like a bruise of color, green, violet, and a cold blue that looked too much like daylight to be trusted. Rhovan set his pace to the bell's rhythm. He moved through the crowd without jostling, slipping past faces he knew by pattern rather than by relationship. Evernight's people were not unkind. They were simply shallow, now. As if each reset skimmed a thin layer of depth away and left only what was needed to play the day again. At the corner of Greysward Lane, Captain Sorcerer Harveyer stood with his watch, adjusting the strap of his gauntlet exactly as he always did. Sorcerer had a strong jaw, a straight spine, and eyes the color of wet slate, honest eyes that belonged in a world where actions mattered. The first time Rhovan had met him, truly met him, Sorcerer had asked, "Do you ever feel as if you're walking through a dream someone else is having?" Rhovan had almost told him everything. Now he simply nodded in greeting as he passed. "Morning, Master Sairn," Sorcerer said automatically, and the word morning landed in the air like an ill-told joke. Rhovan's mouth tightened. "Captain." Sorcerer's gaze followed him for a heartbeat longer than the loop demanded. It always did. Something in the captain's mind snagged on Rhovan like a burr on cloth, a faint resistance to forgetting. But resistance without remembrance was only a kind of ache. Rhovan turned into an alley shadowed by overhanging balconies and came out onto the wide avenue that led toward the inner wall. The Vesper district rose beyond, tall houses with dark glass windows and ironwork vines curling around their roofs. The city's wealth clustered there, close to the sealed places. Close to the heart of the loop. He felt the day's familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the short, relentless span of hours, the knowledge that any progress he made could be stripped away with one bell. Don't waste the third hour. He didn't intend to. Not today. At the second toll, he reached the old aqueduct arch that cut across the avenue like a rib. Beneath it, half hidden behind a vendor's stall, was a door set into the stone, small, black, and warded so heavily it might as well have been a myth. Rhovan's fingers hovered a breath from the iron latch. He could feel the wards like invisible wire, taut with ancient tension. Thread binding was a craft of touch without touching, of sensing the weave beneath the surface. This door's weave was not just tight, it was deliberate in its cruelty. Whoever had built it had wanted not only to keep people out, but to punish them for trying. He had tried anyway, in more loops than he could count. Still, he lifted his hand. He closed his eyes and let his mind slip into the thread sense that lived beneath thought. The world sharpened. Threads, pale as moonlight, dark as ink, ran through the stone, braided into patterns that hummed with restrained force. Rhovan reached for them carefully, like a man reaching into a nest of sleeping serpents. He traced the first knot, then the second, seeking the place where one weave depended on another. If he could loosen the dependency, he could peel the ward back layer by layer. That was always the theory. The practice was, pain snapped down his arm. The ward flared, a cold burn that raced along his nerves and made his fingers jerk. He bit down on a sound. His vision flashed white for an instant, and in that white there was a memory he hadn't asked for, a hand not his own gripping his wrist, a woman's voice murmuring a vow over him. Anchor. He staggered back, palm pressed to the iron. The door remained perfectly still. The vendor behind the stall glanced up, frowned at nothing in particular, and went back to arranging jars of pickled eels. He did not see Rhovan. Or he saw him and forgot the seeing before the moment could become meaningful. Rhovan inhaled through his nose until the ache in his arm settled into a dull throb. He flexed his fingers. They tingled, as if the ward had tried to remove sensation from them and failed only because he was too stubborn to comply. 2 tolls wasted. He turned away from the door and moved on, jaw tight, mind already calculating alternatives. There were other routes. Other hidden seams in the city. He had discovered 3 new ones last week. Last week meant nothing. At the third toll, he was on the roofs. Evernight was best understood from above. The streets were crowded with repetition, but up here the patterns revealed themselves, the way the lamplight pooled like spilled honey, the way chimneys exhaled in unison, the way the inner wall cut the city into safe and not safe. Beyond the wall, the marshes lay like a dark tongue, slick with stagnant water that reflected the nitretha's glow. Rhovan moved across slate tiles and narrow beams with the confidence of a man who had fallen enough times to memorize where the gaps were. He crossed over a rooftop garden where a woman knelt among night-blooming lilies, her hands in the soil. Myra Quenfold, he thought. She always planted, even though nothing she planted ever had time to fully grow. Myra looked up as he passed, her face soft in the lamplight. She did not speak. She rarely did. But her eyes followed him with a quiet steadiness that made Rhovan's chest feel strange, as if he had swallowed something warm. There were moments in the loop that did not reset cleanly in him, small impressions that accumulated like dust in a corner time couldn't quite sweep. Myra's garden was one of them. A stubborn little defiance of the day's tyranny. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and continued toward the rooftop spire that overlooked the western quarter. That was where the aurora would flare. It always did, in the same slow bloom of color, like the sky remembering it had once been allowed to change. The flare always began in the 11th hour. It always peaked at the 12th. It always faded just before 13th midnight. Rhovan had watched it so many times he could anticipate the precise second the violet would deepen to blue. He still watched. Not because it mattered, but because he had to put his eyes somewhere when the day began to feel too small to contain him. He settled on the ledge of the spire and pulled his coat tight. Wind lifted the damp strands of his hair and carried the faint distant smell of the sea. Evernight's harbor lay beyond the buildings, its black water slick with reflected lamplight. The ships never moved. Sailors never finished voyages. His stomach tightened with an old, familiar anger. It had nowhere to go. Anger was wasted energy, and energy was the only currency the loop could not refund. He reached for the glassine shard at his belt. It was clear as frozen breath, but when he held it to the lamplight, faint lines inside it caught and refracted, threads bound into crystal, a memory turned into structure. He had learned to do that in the first year, and then learned to do it better when he realized it was the closest thing to progress he would ever have. Rhovan pressed the shard against his temple and released a single thought into it, careful and clean. Aurora flares at the 12th. Watch the rooftop garden. He didn't know why he wrote that last part. The words had come out of him without permission. He almost laughed at himself. Sentiment was another thing the loop made foolish. Still, he sealed the memory with a precise knot and tucked the shard away. Hours crawled. The city lived its day beneath him, merchants calling the same prices, lovers meeting at the same corner, arguments rising and falling like tidewater. Rhovan watched the patterns with detached attention, making a mental note of small deviations, always searching for the seam, the crack, the place where the loop might be vulnerable. By the 11th toll, the night wreath had begun to stir. The aurora's green brightened, a ribbon twisting slowly across the sky. A hush seemed to settle over the rooftops, though the streets below remained loud. Even the city, for all its trapped repetition, could sense something deep shifting overhead. Rhovan leaned forward, eyes narrowed. This was the moment he always watched for, not because it gave him beauty, but because it gave him data. The violet deepened. The blue bled into it like ink into water. And then, for the first time in countless loops, something happened that was not supposed to happen. A thin line appeared in the air above Myra's garden, too straight to be lightning, too bright to be lamplight. It shimmered, wavering as if reality itself had been cut and was trying to mend. The line widened, and the air buckled like fabric pulled too hard. Rhovan's breath caught. The rift opened with a sound like glass cracking in slow motion. Light spilled out, true light, not lamplight. It was pale and warm, the color of a morning he could barely remember. It painted the rooftop tiles in soft gold, and in that gold, the city looked briefly unreal, as if it had always been starving and someone had finally offered it food. Something fell through. A woman, flailing, hair loose and dark as wet ink, a cloak snapping around her like a startled bird. She hit the garden path hard, rolled, and came up on her hands and knees with a gasp sharp enough to carry even over the street noise. Myra stumbled back, a hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide. For a moment, she looked awake in a way Rhovan had rarely seen in her, fully present, as if the loop had loosened its grip just long enough to let surprise through. Rhovan moved without thought. He launched from the spire ledge and ran across the rooftops, boots striking slate, coat whipping behind him. He reached Myra's roof in seconds, dropping down into the garden with a soft thud. The fallen woman jerked her head up, eyes wild. They were an unusual color, hazel flecked with gold, like sunlight caught in peat water. She looked at him as if he were a threat and a lifeline at the same time. Rhovan stopped 3 steps away, hands open, posture careful. "Don't move too quickly," he said, voice low. "You may be injured." Her voice shook. Where am I?" Myra's lips parted, as if she might answer, but no sound came. Her hands trembled above her lilies. Rhovan's gaze flicked to the air behind the woman. The rift still hung there, a ragged wound of light, pulsing with tension. Threads screamed at his senses, foreign and sharp, like a new string plucked too hard. This wasn't an illusion. This wasn't a glitch in his mind. This was outside. He had imagined outside so many times it had become a kind of fairy tale he told himself in the dark. The woman pushed to her feet, swaying. She clutched a leather satchel to her chest as if it contained her heart. This isn't the archway," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "It was supposed to." Her words cut off as she looked past him, over the edge of the roof, at Evernight's endless lamplight. The realization crossed her face slowly, like a shadow passing over a candle flame. "No," she said softly. "No, that's not." Rhovan's throat tightened. "Your name." She blinked at him, startled by the demand. Your name," he repeated, more gently. "If you can give it." A heartbeat. Then, as if the act of naming herself anchored her, she swallowed and said, Ysella. Ysella Vey. The name did not ring any bell in the city. That alone was proof enough. Rhovan gave her his own name with reluctance that surprised him. He had not spoken it to anyone with meaning in a very long time. Rhovan Sairn. Ysella's gaze held his, searching. Her breathing slowed, fraction by fraction. In her eyes, Rhovan saw fear, yes, but also a fierce curiosity. The kind that made people step through forbidden doorways. Behind her, the rift shuddered. The light flickered. Rovan's instincts snapped taut. Move, he said, reaching for her arm. She flinched away, eyes flashing. Don't touch me. The refusal was sharp, immediate, and entirely reasonable. He stopped his hand midair, forcing himself to exhale. Then step back. Now. The tear is unstable. How would you know? She demanded, voice strained. Because I've watched the same sky for years and it's never done this, he thought. Because every rule I've learned is shaking. Out loud, he said only, because it doesn't belong here. The rift contracted suddenly, as if something on the other side had tugged it closed. The light narrowed to a slit. Ysella made a sound, half gasp, half plea, and lunged toward it. Rhovan moved faster, catching her satchel strap and yanking her back hard enough that she stumbled into him. For an instant, she was pressed against his chest, her breath warm through his coat, her fingers gripping his sleeve. The contact was brief, accidental, and yet it sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with magic. His body remembered touch. His mind remembered what it meant to have another living person close enough to feel their heartbeat. Ysella tore herself free immediately, cheeks flushed, eyes furious and frightened. You! The rift snapped shut with a sound like a door slamming. Silence fell in the garden, heavy and stunned. Myra's lilies swayed, disturbed by a wind that had no source. The golden light vanished, leaving only Evernight's endless dusk. Ysella stared at the place where the rift had been, mouth open, as if she could force it back through sheer will. Then her shoulders sagged. She clutched her satchel tighter and turned on Rhovan, anger sharpening her grief. What did you do? She demanded. Rhovan held her gaze steadily. Nothing. It closed. You grabbed me. You were going to throw yourself into something tearing reality open. He kept his voice controlled, but he could feel an edge in it. He was not used to being questioned. Not like this. Not by someone whose eyes were alive. Ysella's jaw trembled. I have to get back. I wasn't supposed to, she swallowed hard, forcing the words into steadiness. Where is this place? Evernight, Rhovan thought. A city built like a trap. Before he could answer, Myra took a shaky step forward. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. You fell from the sky, she said, as if reciting a fact she needed to hear aloud to believe. No one falls from the sky. Ysella's gaze flicked to Myra, then back to Rhovan. You knew, she said, suspicion rising again. You were watching. Rhovan didn't deny it. Yes. Why? Because it's the only thing that ever changes, and now it did, he thought. He chose the simplest truth. Because the sky is the closest thing Evernight has to a clock that isn't lying. Ysella frowned. Evernight. The name landed between them like a key. Rhovan took a careful breath. He could tell her the truth now, in a burst of bitter honesty. He could tell her about the loop, the resets, the endless repetition that had carved him hollow. He could watch her face change from confusion to horror. He should. She deserved the truth. But truth had consequences, and in Evernight, consequences were complicated by time that refused to move. The air felt tense, prickling at the edges of his thread sense. The loop noticed. It always noticed when something shifted too far out of its established grooves. Rhovan's eyes went to the sky. The aurora still glimmered, but its blue had dimmed. The 12th hour was passing. 13th midnight would come. He had minutes before everything reset. Come with me, he said abruptly. Ysella stared. What? Off this roof, he clarified, then softened his tone. You're not safe here. I'm not safe anywhere, if I'm trapped in a place I don't understand. That was fair. The sharpness of her mind, even through fear, impressed him. He did not allow himself to show it. Then understand quickly, he said. If you stay, the watch will arrive. They always do when anything unusual happens in the Vesper Quarter. You keep saying always. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, always? Rhovan hesitated. Myra's gaze shifted between them, her expression unreadable. But there was a faint pleading in it too, as if she sensed this moment mattered, even if she wouldn't remember why. Rhovan made his choice. It's a repeating day, he said. Evernight resets at 13th midnight. It has for a long time. Ysella didn't laugh. She didn't scoff. She simply stared at him, and a slow, dreadful understanding spread across her face as if the words had unlocked something she had been trying not to see. No, she whispered. That's not possible. Rhovan's mouth twisted. It is. How do you know? Her voice rose. How could you possibly? A bell tolled in the distance, deeper than the Glomebell's usual voice. The air shivered. The hairs on Rhovan's arms lifted. The loop tightening. Rhovan stepped toward Ysella, careful, giving her space even as urgency pressed him. You have questions. I have answers. But we need to move. Ysella's fingers tightened on her satchel until her knuckles went white. She looked at the sky again, at the endless dusk. She looked at the streets below, at the lamplight and the people who moved like they were half asleep. Then she looked back at Rhovan and said, You remember. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. Rovan's throat tightened. Yes. Her eyes widened. How? He didn't have time for the full story. Later, he said. If you come. For a moment, she looked as if she might refuse out of sheer fear. Then her chin lifted. Fine, she said, voice rough. But if you're lying. I'm not. She glanced at Myra, who stood with her hands hovering over her lilies, as if afraid to touch them. What about her? Myra blinked, the question seeming to catch on something in her mind. She looked down at her garden, then up again. I don't know. Rovan's chest tightened. He did know. Myra would forget. She would kneel tomorrow and plant the same seeds again, and the day would swallow the shock of what she had witnessed. Unless. He reached for the glassine shard at his belt. His fingers hesitated. Glass binding was a delicate thing, hiding memory from the reset came at a cost, and the loop fought it. Still, he held the shard out to Myra. Take this, he said. Keep it under your tongue when the last bell tolls. Myra stared at the shard as if it were a star. Why? So that some part of you remembers you once saw light, Rhovan said quietly. Myra's eyes filled not with tears, exactly, but with the bright sheen of emotion that had nowhere to go in her half-dreaming life. She took the shard with trembling fingers and nodded once, solemnly, as if accepting a sacred duty. Ysella watched the exchange with a strange expression, shock, sorrow, and something else, softer. Something that tightened Rhovan's chest in a way he didn't want to name. They hurried from the rooftop garden, Rhovan leading along the roofline toward the safer warren of the western quarter where the Vesper watch was slower to notice anomalies. Ysella followed, moving with surprising agility despite the fall, her breath audible behind him. As they crossed a narrow beam between two buildings, Ysella slipped. Her foot skidded on damp slate, and she lurched, arms flailing. Rhovan caught her by the elbow without thinking. She froze at his touch, breath catching. He felt the tremor in her muscles through the fabric of her sleeve. For a heartbeat, they balanced together over the drop, the city's lamplight yawning below like an open mouth. Rovan's grip tightened just enough to steady her, careful not to hurt. I won't let you fall, he said, and the words came out rawer than he intended. Ysella's gaze flicked to his hand, then to his face. Her eyes were very close. He could see flecks of gold near her pupils like tiny trapped suns. Something in her expression shifted, fear easing into trust, not fully, but enough to change the air between them. Thank you, she whispered, and the sincerity in it struck him harder than any ward backlash. He released her as soon as she was stable, stepping back as if distance could protect him from the feeling that had sparked in his chest. They reached his building just as the 12th hour deepened into the city's false night. Rhovan pulled Ysella inside through the apothecary's shadowed doorway, up the stairs to his rooms. He closed the door behind them and shoved the bolt into place with more force than necessary. Ysella stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking in the table, the window, the kettle, the 3 ritual objects. Her gaze snagged on the scrap of paper. "Don't waste the 3rd hour." She looked at it, then at him. "You wrote that," she said softly. "Yes. Because you do this every day." Rhovan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was everywhere in the room, an arrangement of survival. Ysella lowered herself onto the edge of the chair as if her body had finally realized it could be tired. She exhaled shakily. "I'm not dreaming," she murmured. "No," Rhovan said. Her eyes lifted to his. "How long?" He hesitated. Numbers were meaningless in a loop, and yet the weight of years lived inside him like stones. "Long enough to stop counting," he said at last. Ysella's face tightened with a grief too large for a stranger's story. She swallowed. "That's cruelty." Rovan's jaw clenched. "It's reality. You said it resets at 13th midnight." She looked toward the window, toward the city beyond. "So all of this, everything anyone does, just unravels," Rhovan said. He touched the glass-shard sleeve at his belt. "Except what you can hide from it. And what I remember." Ysella's gaze sharpened. "And I remember. I don't know yet." Rovan's voice went even. "That's why you're here. That's why you came through." "I didn't choose to," she began, then stopped. Her hand went to her satchel, fingers brushing its clasp as if drawing courage from it. "I stepped through an archway ruin. There was light. I thought it was." She shook her head, frustrated. "It doesn't matter. I need to go back." Rovan's chest tightened with something dangerous. "Hope." He kept it leashed. "If you can open that rift again," he said carefully, "you might be able to do more than go back." Ysella frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean you might be able to break the loop." The words tasted sharp and impossible on his tongue. Silence. Outside, the city continued toward its final bell. Inside, Ysella stared at him as if he had just spoken a blasphemy. "Break it," she repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Why haven't you already?" Rovan's mouth twisted. "Because it resists. Because the people who built it didn't build it to be broken by one exhausted sorcerer with too much guilt." "You said people," Ysella said, catching on the detail like a hook. "Who?" Rhovan didn't answer. He didn't want to speak the Vesper name aloud when the loop was already listening. As if in response to the thought, the air in the room shivered. The lamplight in the street outside flickered. Rhovan felt the familiar pressure building, like invisible hands tightening around the day, preparing to wring it back into its starting shape. 13th midnight approached. Rhovan moved quickly, pulling a second chair out for himself and sitting opposite Ysella, forcing calm into his posture. "Listen to me," he said. "In a moment, everything will reset. You will wake somewhere else, and you will remember none of this." Ysella's eyes widened. "No. Unless you're different," Rhovan corrected. "Unless the rift brought you in outside the coil. If so, you might remember." "Why do you think that?" Her voice shook. Rhovan gestured toward the glass-shard sleeve. "Because the loop is a weave. It holds what belongs to it. It erases what it can. You didn't belong, and it couldn't erase your arrival before my eyes. That alone is something it hasn't done in years." Ysella swallowed hard, gaze darting around the room as if searching for a hidden door out of the truth. "If I don't remember, then I'll come back to you tomorrow and you'll tell me again." Rovan's throat tightened. "Yes. And you've done that," she said, understanding dawning, "with other people. You've told them, and they forget, and you tell them again." Rhovan didn't look away. "Yes." Her eyes softened, not with pity alone, but with a fierce kind of respect. "How do you bear it?" "I don't," Rhovan said quietly. "I endure it." The last bell began to toll. It was deeper than the Glomebell's first call, a sound that seemed to come from beneath the city rather than above it. The air thickened. The kettle water on the stove trembled, unable to decide what it was. For a heartbeat, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Ysella's fingers tightened on her satchel strap. Her gaze locked on Rhovan's face as if she could carve it into her memory by force. Rhovan felt something in him strain, an instinct to reach out, to anchor her the way he had been anchored. The thought was dangerous. Binding another person to the loop was a cruelty he would not repeat, no matter how lonely he was. Still, his hand moved, not to bind but to offer. He slid the glassen shard from his belt sleeve and placed it on the table between them. "If you can hold one thought," he said, voice tight, "hold this." Ysella's eyes flicked to the shard. "How?" "Press it to your tongue," he said. "Think of one thing you refuse to lose. Seal it with your will. It might work. Or it might shatter. But it's a chance." Ysella reached for the shard with trembling fingers. She hesitated only a heartbeat before lifting it. She pressed it to her lips, then tucked it under her tongue. Her eyes squeezed shut. Rhovan watched her, something aching in his chest. He had watched so many people reach for impossible chances and forget them afterward. But Ysella's determination felt different. It wasn't a desperate flail, it was a choice. The toll deepened. The room dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, as if the world couldn't decide how to be. Rhovan met Ysella's eyes one last time. "If you remember," he said, "come to the rooftop garden at the 12th hour. Don't let the watch see you. Say my name." Ysella tried to speak around the shard under her tongue. The word came out muffled, but he understood the shape of it, Rhovan. Then the bell struck its final note. The world snapped. For an instant, there was nothing, no sound, no light, no time. Rhovan felt the familiar wrench in his bones as if someone had grabbed the spine of reality and turned it back like a key. And then, the first toll of the Gloam bell thundered through Evernight again. Rhovan was standing at his window, hand pressed to the glass, as if he had never moved. Below, the same lamplighters tapped the same lanterns. The same woman crossed with her basket. The same boy ran after her. Rhovan's breath came hard and sharp, as if he had been underwater. He turned from the window, eyes sweeping the room. The table was arranged as always. The coin. The scrap of paper. Anne. His stomach dropped. The glassen shard was gone. Rhovan's mind raced. Had he put it away? Had the loop taken it? Had he imagined giving it to her in a desperate, hope-poisoned moment? He forced himself to inhale. Forced himself to look at the paper. Don't waste the 3rd hour. He didn't. He snatched his coat, took the stairs 2 at a time, and burst into the street. His feet carried him without thought, moving through the morning that wasn't, toward the rooftops, toward Myra's garden. The day was already playing its script, but now the script had a tear in it. At the 3rd toll, he vaulted onto the roofline. At the 11th, he reached the spire again and stared toward the garden, heart pounding, eyes searching the air for a shimmer of impossible light. The aurora began to flare. Violet deepened. Blue bled into it. A rift split the air above the lilies. Light spilled out. And a woman fell through with a gasp, hitting the garden path hard, rolling, and coming up on trembling hands. Rhovan ran. When he dropped into the garden this time, Ysella's head snapped up as if she had been waiting for him, eyes wild, yes, but sharpened by something more than confusion. She saw him and froze. Then, with the glassen shard clenched between her fingers like a talisman, she whispered in a hoarse, disbelieving voice, "Rhovan Sairn." The sound of his name in her mouth, remembered, hit him like the first true sunrise. He didn't smile. He didn't dare. But something in his chest, long starved and wary, loosened by a fraction. "Yes," he said, voice rough. "You remember." Ysella swallowed, and fear and awe and stubborn hope collided in her eyes. "I do," she breathed. "And if I'm right, we don't have much time." The moment Ysella spoke his name, the loop's air pressure changed. Rhovan felt it like a tightening around his ribs, a subtle resistance in the threads beneath the world. Evernight did not like being recognized. It did not like being named from outside its own script. He kept his face still, though something in him had lurched hard enough to leave him breathless. "Don't say it again," he murmured. "Not out here." Ysella's fingers were wrapped around the glassen shard so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She looked as if she expected the sky to split open a second time and swallow her. "It's real," she whispered, eyes flicking from him to the space where the rift still pulsed raggedly above the lilies. It stayed with me. The shard. The bell. You. Rhovan's gaze snagged on the shard. A clean, bright line ran along one edge, hairline fracture, barely visible. She had pushed too much into it. Or the loop had tried to crush it and failed. Either way, the fact remained, she had carried memory across 13th Midnight. Come, he said, and this time he didn't offer his hand. He simply stepped back and waited, giving her the dignity of choosing. Ysella's throat bobbed. Then she nodded once and followed him along the roofline as the rift shuddered behind them, contracting with a sound like distant tearing cloth. Rhovan didn't look back. If he watched it close again, he might start believing in doorways. They crossed slate and beam, keeping low. Evernight's watch had patterns, Rhovan knew them all. Still, he felt the loop's attention prickling against the nape of his neck, like a cold fingertip tracing the line of his spine. When they dropped into the alley behind the apothecary, Ysella flinched at the shadows, her shoulders tense. She moved quietly, but her eyes took in everything, hungry and alert. In another life, she would have been the sort of person who couldn't pass a sealed gate without wanting to know what lay beyond it. In this life, that instinct might save them both. Inside his rooms, Rhovan slid the bolt home and turned to her. Tell me what you remember, he said. Ysella exhaled shakily and pulled the shard from her pocket. Not everything, she admitted. It's like waking from a dream where you know it mattered but the details are running away. I remember the bell. I remember you telling me to put this under my tongue. I remember thinking, her voice caught. I remember thinking I wouldn't let you be alone in it. The words landed with an intimacy that had nothing to do with closeness of bodies. Rhovan's fingers curled hard against his palm. He forced himself not to look away. You don't know me, he said, because caution was his oldest habit. Ysella's eyes flashed. I know what I heard in your voice. Rhovan let out a slow breath through his nose. He had learned, over countless resets, that arguing with truth was a waste of time. And time was the only thing he could not afford to waste. All right, he said. We'll do this properly. He went to the table and cleared a space. From a drawer he pulled out a stub of charcoal and a strip of cloth. He did not offer her paper. Paper was a liar in Evernight. He unfolded the cloth and smoothed it flat. The weave of it was coarse, but it would serve. Right, he said. Everything you remember. Even fragments. Even feelings. The loop steals details first. Ysella stared. This won't survive the reset. No, Rhovan agreed. But you might. And if you do, you'll bring your own record. Her gaze dipped, thoughtful. She took the charcoal with fingers that still trembled and began to write in a quick, slanted hand. Rhovan watched her for a moment, then turned away and opened his cupboard. He set water to boil and, this time, lit the flame. The kettle hissed like a small, impatient creature. While it heated, he took out his own glass-in supply, a slim leather case containing 3 clear shards and 1 cloudy one. The cloudy shard had been used too many times. It held old impressions, like fingerprints in fog. He should have discarded it long ago, but he had never been good at letting go of things that had endured with him. Ysella's charcoal scratched steadily across cloth. Rhovan poured 2 cups of tea and set one near her elbow. The scent of bitter leaf rose warm and herbal, grounding. She glanced at it, surprised, then at him. You make tea, she said softly, as if she hadn't expected him to do anything gentle. I make routines, Rhovan corrected, and then, because he didn't want his own words to sour the air, he added, drink. You hit stone. She lifted the cup with both hands and took a careful sip. Her eyes closed briefly, and something eased in her face. When she opened them, she looked at him as if she had decided he was not a threat in this moment. Rhovan sat opposite her. Now, he said. Tell me about your world. The archway. Ysella's gaze flicked away, as if the memory hurt. It was an old ruin on the cliffs near my town, she said. We call it the Sunstep Arch. No one uses it. It's just stone, broken with age. But a few nights ago, the sky did something strange. A streak of light like a falling star, but it didn't fall. It hung. And I kept dreaming of it. She let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm a map-scribe. I make sense of things. When something doesn't make sense, it gets under my skin. Rhovan didn't comment on the irony of a map-scribe falling into a city that had forgotten how to move forward. I went to the arch, Ysella continued, voice steadier now. The air felt thin, like fabric stretched too tight. And there was light between the stones, even though the moon was behind clouds. I touched it. I thought maybe it was some rare atmospheric trick, or a glowmoss, or she shook her head. I stepped through. And ended up here, Rhovan finished. Yes. She looked up sharply. You said Evernight is a weave. That the city resets. Who made it? Rovan's jaw tightened. Names mattered. Speaking them felt like pulling on a thread that might tighten the loop around their throats. The Vesper houses, he said at last. The families in the inner quarter. They built the mechanism that keeps time folded. Ysella absorbed that, eyes narrowing. And you're bound to it. Yes. Why you? Rovan's gaze dropped to his wrist. The pale band of ink looked almost innocent in lamplight. Because I tried to unmake what they built, he said. And when I failed, they decided the safest punishment was to make sure someone always remembered the cost of trying again. Ysella's expression sharpened into anger on his behalf, so immediate it startled him. That's monstrous. It's practical, Rhovan said, though the word tasted like ash. They needed an anchor. Someone who could respond if the loop slipped. Someone who could correct deviations. And you've spent years correcting the same day, Ysella said, voice quiet with dawning horror. For them. For Evernight, he corrected before he could stop himself. Ysella looked at him for a long moment. You still care about these people, she said. Even after what was done to you. Rhovan didn't answer. The truth of it sat in his chest like a stone. He didn't know when caring had become habit and habit had become the only thing that made the loop bearable. He only knew he could not watch suffering repeat without trying, even if trying was pointless. Ysella's charcoal stopped scratching. She set it down and leaned forward slightly. If I remember, she said, then I can help you. Rhovan held her gaze. Help is not the same as ending. Then we work toward ending, Ysella said simply. The simplicity of her statement, clean, unwavering, was another kind of intimacy. Rhovan felt the old reflex to snuff it out before it could disappoint him. Instead, he asked, what did you store in the shard? Ysella's hand went to her pocket. She pulled out the glass again and held it up. In lamplight, faint thread lines shimmered within it, like a tiny net catching starlight. Your name, she admitted. And the feeling that if I lost it, I would lose everything. Rovan's throat tightened. He looked away first, because he had lived too long with his emotions hidden in corners, like contraband. A bell sounded in the distance, midday's marker. The day slid forward, indifferent. Rhovan forced himself to focus. All right, he said briskly. We have one advantage, you can carry memory through the reset. That means we can do what I've never been able to do alone, accumulate knowledge. Ysella straightened. Tell me what you need. I need you to learn how Evernight works, Rhovan said. Not the surface. The underlying patterns. What stays? What fights? What changes when you push? Ysella's brows knit. And how do we do that without breaking people? Rhovan paused. That question, asked with such immediate care, made him feel exposed. He had manipulated strangers in hundreds of loops because the loop turned morality into a slippery thing. When no one remembered, consequences were a matter of principle rather than outcome. Cleanly, he said at last. As clean as we can. Ysella nodded, accepting the weight of that. Rhovan stood and pulled a small, worn ledger from a shelf, its pages filled with cramped writing in his hand. This won't survive the reset, he said, tapping it. But it will help you understand today. He opened it to a page marked with a thin ribbon and slid it across the table. The writing listed hours and places, names, and notes. Ysella's eyes widened. You've mapped the whole day. Many times, Rhovan said. This is the best version. Ysella ran a finger over the ink, careful, as if touching it too hard might break it. You've been doing this alone. Rhovan swallowed. Yes. She looked up. Not anymore. The words were quiet, almost matter-of-fact, but they struck with more force than he was prepared for. He steadied himself by reaching for the task. First lesson, he said. Evernights watch patrol routes. We need to move without drawing their attention. Second, the glass archive. Ysella's gaze sharpened. The library you mentioned. Rhovan nodded. It holds memory in crystal. If we can learn how to seal more than a name into your shard, if we can store instructions, maps, ward patterns, then each loop becomes useful. Ysella's expression turned determined. Then we go there. We do, Rhovan agreed. But we don't go as ourselves. She blinked. What? Rovan's mouth tightened. The Vespers know my face. They will not know yours yet, but if you're seen with me, you'll be noticed. And the loop is vicious when it notices. Ysella hesitated. So we disguise ourselves. Rhovan reached into the closet and pulled out 2 plain cloaks, one charcoal grey, one brown. He tossed the brown one to her. Hoods up, he said. And speak as little as possible. Ysella caught the cloak and pulled it on. It hung a little large, swallowing her shoulders, but it did its job. When she lifted the hood, her face fell into shadow, leaving only the glint of her eyes. Rovan's chest tightened, and he didn't know why. Perhaps because hiding her felt wrong, when she was the first real light he'd seen in years. He shoved the thought away and led her down the stairs and out into the city. They moved through the western quarter first, where the buildings leaned close and the streets smelled of hearth smoke and damp bread. Rhovan kept them in the flow of the crowd, never pushing against it. The loop liked compliance. Resistance drew its teeth. As they walked, Ysella leaned closer, not touching him, but close enough that her breath warmed the air near his sleeve. If the day repeats, she murmured, then the people, are they trapped in it without knowing? Yes, Rhovan said softly. And you've watched them live the same moments over and over. Yes. Ysella's voice lowered further. Have you ever tried to tell someone you cared about them, knowing they'd forget? Rovan's steps faltered half a beat. The question was not prying, it was gentle, curious in a way that did not demand pain for the sake of knowing. No, he said, and then he added, because honesty mattered with her more than it had any right to, not like that. I tried once to build something with someone. The loop took it. I stopped trying. Ysella didn't push. She simply nodded, as if she understood the shape of the wound without needing to poke it. They reached the outer edge of the Vesper district, where lamplight grew whiter and the stones underfoot were cleaner. Here, the buildings were taller, their windows made of dark glass that reflected the city like an accusation. The glass archive stood between 2 narrow towers, its entrance framed by carved stone that looked like frozen water. The doors were glass, not transparent, but milky, threaded with faint luminescence. The whole structure hummed with woven memory. Rhovan paused at the threshold, senses flaring. The archive's wards were intricate, layered like lace, and they tasted of restraint and sorrow. Ysella looked up at the doors. It feels heavy, she whispered. It should, Rhovan said. It holds what Evernight tries to lose. They stepped inside. The air changed. It was cooler, drier, scented faintly of mineral and lavender, an attempt to keep the crystal from clouding. Lamps floated near the ceiling, their light soft and steady. Rows of shelves stretched into shadow, filled not with books but with thin crystal spines, glass in shards and cylinders and plates, each labeled with neat ink. A man stood behind the central desk, sorting shards into velvet-lined trays. His hair was silver and his eyes sharp, as if he could see through lies simply by watching how people blinked. Eld Brennikar looked up. His gaze slid over Rovan's hooded face, lingered a fraction longer than it should have, then moved to Ysella. Rhovan felt his pulse quicken. Eld was careful. Eld was a survivor. And Eld sometimes remembered more than he ought. Eld's mouth twitched as if suppressing a smile. You're early, he said blandly. Rhovan lowered his hood just enough to show his eyes. We need access. Eld's gaze flicked to Ysella again. And you brought a friend. His tone made the word friend sound like a dangerous novelty. Ysella stiffened, instinctively wary. Rhovan watched her carefully. If she panicked, if she raised her voice, if she drew notice. ELD leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. She's not from here. Rhovan's stomach dropped. How? ELD's fingers tapped the desk. Because the archive sings when something new enters the weave. He nodded toward Ysella's pocket. And because that shard is cracked like it fought the world and won. Ysella's hand went protectively to her pocket. Who are you? She demanded softly. ELD Brenikar, he said with a small, careful bow. Keeper of what people forget. Rhovan didn't waste time. Teach her, he said. How to seal memory properly. How to hide it from the reset. ELD's expression tightened, and for a moment he looked tired, an old tiredness that matched Rhovan's more than Rhovan liked. That's a dangerous request, ELD murmured. So is existing in this city, Ysella said, voice fierce despite her attempt to keep it low. If I can remember, then we can. ELD's eyes softened a fraction. Yes, he said, as if acknowledging a truth he had been waiting to hear spoken. If you can remember, you can do what none of us have ever been allowed to do. Rhovan watched ELD carefully. Allowed, he repeated. ELD's gaze flicked toward the ceiling, toward the floating lamps. The archive isn't blind, he said quietly. And the Vespers aren't deaf. Rhovan's jaw tightened. Then we have to be quick. ELD hesitated only a heartbeat, then gestured for them to follow. He led them down a side aisle to a small alcove where shelves curved inward, creating a pocket of shadow. Here, the hum of wards was different, muted, as if the archive itself was holding its breath. ELD reached behind a row of labeled cylinders and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside lay 4 glassine shards, each cut in a different shape. These are blank, ELD said. True blank. Not scavenged, not reused. They'll take a weave cleanly. Ysella stared. Why are you giving us these? ELD's gaze met hers. Because I'm tired of watching people forget what they deserve to keep, he said simply. Rhovan felt something shift in his chest. He had known ELD for hundreds of loops, and yet he had never heard him speak with that kind of naked conviction. It reminded Rhovan, uncomfortably, of Ysella's certainty. ELD turned to Ysella. Show me your shard. She hesitated, then pulled it out and handed it over. ELD held it up, squinting. You sealed a name into it, he murmured. And something else. Emotion. That's why it cracked. Feelings are large things. They don't like being confined. Ysella's cheeks warmed, but she didn't look away. I didn't know how. You did better than most, ELD said gently. He shifted his gaze to Rhovan. You told her to hold it under her tongue. Yes. ELD's mouth twitched. Of course you did. Rhovan ignored the implication. ELD placed the cracked shard in Ysella's palm. Lesson 1, he said. Glassine takes what you offer it. But it needs structure. If you pour yourself into it, it will fracture. You must select. Ysella nodded, fierce concentration on her face. Lesson 2, ELD continued, is the seal. You don't close it with force. You close it with clarity. He pointed to the faint threadlines inside the shard. See how your weave is, tangled. That's emotion pulling the thread off course. Ysella swallowed. So I have to be calm. No, ELD said. You have to be precise. Calm is a luxury. Precision is a choice. Rhovan watched Ysella's face as she absorbed that, her expression sharpening. She was already rearranging her understanding of magic like a map being redrawn. ELD took one of the blank shards from the velvet box and placed it in her hand. Try, he said. Store 1 sentence. Something functional. Ysella held the shard, breathed once, then closed her eyes. Her brow furrowed. She pressed the shard to her tongue as if following instinct and instruction at once. Rhovan felt the air tighten. Threads stirred around her, not like Evernight's weaving, but like a seam being held open. Through light, he thought, though he hadn't used the word aloud. Ysella's eyes opened. What sentence? Rhovan hesitated. Then he said, rooftop garden at 12th hour. Ysella nodded slightly and focused. ELD watched, still as stone. Rhovan watched too, feeling an odd tension in his chest that had nothing to do with the loop and everything to do with wanting her to succeed. After a long breath, Ysella lowered the shard. It remained clear, no fractures, no clouding, only a faint shimmer within, like a thread caught in sunlight. ELD's eyebrows lifted. "Well," he murmured. "You learn quickly." Ysella let out a shaky laugh that sounded half like relief and half like disbelief. "So it's possible." "It's possible," ELD agreed. "With care." Rhovan leaned in. "Can she store more?" he asked. ELD's gaze turned sharp. "Yes. But not endlessly. Each shard has capacity. Each use carries risk. And the loop will notice if you push too hard." Ysella straightened. "Then we use this wisely." Rhovan nodded, approving despite himself. ELD reached for another shard. "There's something else," he said quietly. "If you're truly outside the coil, if the reset can't fully claim you, then you might be able to do more than store memory." Ysella's eyes widened. "What?" ELD's gaze flicked to Rhovan, as if asking permission to speak. Rovan's jaw tightened. "Say it." ELD lowered his voice further. "There are places in Evernight where the weave is thin, where the loop's stitching shows. If she touches those places, she might tug." Ysella's fingers curled around the shard. "A seam." "Yes," ELD said. "A seam." Rovan's mind raced. He thought of the warded door beneath the aqueduct, of the rift itself, of the Glomebell mechanism that always felt slightly out of tune. "You know where?" Rhovan asked. ELD hesitated. "I know one," he admitted. "But it's in the inner quarter, near the nocturne vaults." Rovan's stomach tightened. "The Vespers will be there." "They're always there," ELD said, bitterness slipping through his careful tone. "Because they're afraid of what will happen if they aren't." Ysella's gaze went hard. "Then we go anyway." Rhovan studied her. "Bravery without planning is just another way to die," he said. "And planning without bravery is just another way to stay trapped," Ysella shot back. For a moment, silence stretched between them, charged, not hostile, but alive. Rhovan felt the strange sensation of being challenged by someone whose hope was not naive. It was sharpened by fear and still held steady. ELD cleared his throat softly, as if reminding them the archive had ears. "We should move," he murmured. "You're being watched." Rovan's thread sense flared, and he realized ELD was right. The air near the alcove had shifted, an almost imperceptible tightening, like someone had drawn a curtain. Not a physical curtain. A ward curtain. Someone had passed nearby and brushed the archive's outer weave. Rovan's pulse quickened. "Go," he said to Ysella, voice low. "Hood up." Ysella obeyed immediately. They followed ELD back toward the front desk, taking a different aisle, moving in the flow of quiet scholars and archive attendants. As they neared the entrance, Rhovan caught a glimpse of charcoal cloaks near the door, two figures standing too still, their posture too formal for ordinary patrons. Vesper agents. Not full watch, but housebound eyes. Rovan's jaw clenched. "They're here early," he murmured. Ysella's breath hitched. "Because of me." "Because of us," Rhovan corrected. He adjusted his path without looking like he adjusted it, steering Ysella toward a side exit that led into an interior courtyard. ELD's voice floated behind them, calm and unaffected. "Do come again," he called, as if they were ordinary visitors. The side door opened onto a courtyard filled with pale stone and a single black-leaved tree whose branches twisted like ink strokes. The air here was colder, the lamplight dimmer. Rhovan moved quickly, guiding Ysella along the edge where shadows pooled. A soft footstep sounded behind them. Rhovan didn't turn. He didn't have to. He recognized that cadence, measured, controlled, as if the walker wanted the world to know he was not afraid of it. A man's voice spoke from the courtyard archway. "Master Sairn." Rhovan stopped. Ysella stopped too, but her shoulders rose, tense, ready. Rhovan turned slowly. A Vesper man stood beneath the arch, his cloak lined with a faint silver thread that caught the dim light. His hair was dark, cut neatly, and his eyes were the cold, polished brown of cured wood. He smiled with his mouth only. "Warden Calethorn," Rhovan said, voice flat. Calethorn's smile widened slightly. You're far from your usual paths, he observed. Rhovan's thread sense tasted the man's wards, subtle, elegant, meant for restraint rather than attack. A leash, not a blade. I walk where I please, Rhovan replied. Calethorn's gaze slid to Ysella, lingering. His eyes narrowed a fraction. And you've found new company. Ysella's chin lifted. I'm no one, she said, trying for casual and failing because fear made her voice too sharp. Calethorn's attention sharpened at the failure. He took a step forward. No one, he repeated, as if savoring the lie. Evernight is not often visited by strangers. Rhovan felt the loop tighten around them, hungry. This was the kind of moment it liked to correct an anomaly confronted. He reached into his thread sense, searching for a path that didn't involve violence. Violence drew attention. Attention drew the loop's teeth. Warden, Rhovan said, you're blocking the way. Calethorn's smile remained. I'm ensuring order. You know how the matron values order. The mention of matron Olis Vesper made Ysella's eyes flash. Rhovan caught it, and the spark of anger in her could have been a beacon. He shifted slightly, placing himself a fraction between Ysella and Calethorn, subtle, not protective enough to insult her, but enough to intercept. Calethorn's gaze flicked to the movement and softened with amusement. How dutiful, he murmured. Tell me, does she remember? Ysella stiffened so sharply it was as if the words had struck her. Rhovan's pulse spiked. He kept his face still. Remember what? Calethorn's eyes glinted. That would be telling, wouldn't it? The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Rhovan made a decision. He reached into the threads of the air around Calethorn, not the man himself, but the space he occupied, and knotted a subtle tug into the lamplight. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction, a whisper to the world that something behind Calethorn was more interesting than two cloaked figures trying to leave. The black-leaved trees' branches shivered. One heavy limb dipped suddenly, showering the stone with dry, ink-dark leaves. Calethorn's head turned instinctively. Rhovan moved. He caught Ysella's sleeve, this time she didn't jerk away, and pulled her toward the courtyard's far gate. They ran. Footsteps thundered behind them, then split as Calethorn barked an order. Rhovan didn't look back. He felt Ysella's breath ragged at his side, but she kept pace, cloak flaring. They burst into a narrow street and melted into the crowd just as the afternoon market swelled, vendors shouting, buyers haggling, children darting like minnows between legs. Noise was cover. Chaos was camouflage. They didn't stop until they reached the shadowed alley behind the apothecary again. Rhovan pressed Ysella gently against the wall and scanned the street, senses flared, searching for pursuit. The loop trembled beneath his awareness, irritated. Ysella's chest rose and fell fast. Her eyes were wide, furious and frightened. He knew, she hissed. He knew about the remembering. He guessed, Rhovan said, voice low. Or he's been watching for a long time. Ysella's fingers clenched around the cloak. Why would they care if people forget? If they're so sure they're saving the city. Because control is fragile, Rhovan said, and the bitterness in him slipped through. And because if you remember, you can choose. Ysella's gaze met his. And if you can choose, she whispered, then they can't. Rhovan felt something in her words click into place like a lock turning. It wasn't just fear driving her now. It was understanding. Purpose. He forced himself back into strategy. We have shards, he said. We have a teacher. And now we have proof the Vespers are aware of you. Ysella swallowed. So what now? Rhovan glanced up at the sky. The Nightwreather's colors were shifting again, subtle, slow. The day was moving toward its end. Toward the reset. Now, he said, we test the edges. Ysella's brows knit. The seams. Rhovan nodded. He reached for her cracked shard and held it between two fingers. Tonight, before 13th midnight, you will store 3 things, he said. Not emotion. Not fear. Facts. Ysella's eyes narrowed in concentration. Which facts? Rhovan lifted one finger. 1. The name Calethorn. He lifted a second. 2. The side exit route from the archive. A third. 3. The phrase ELD used, thin places. Ysella nodded once. And you? I'll do what I always do, Rhovan said. I'll survive the reset. Ysella's gaze softened for a heartbeat, and in that softness Rhovan saw the beginning of something that could become dangerous if he let it grow too quickly. You don't have to do it alone anymore, she said again, quieter. Rovan's throat tightened. He looked away, focusing on the alley stones. We'll see what the loop allows, he murmured. Ysella's hand rose tentatively, hovering near his sleeve, not touching, as if she was asking permission with the space between them. Rhovan, she said, and his name sounded different now, less like an experiment, more like a promise. He glanced back at her, and in her eyes he saw fear still, but also a steady kind of courage that did not demand reassurance. It simply stood. Rhovan nodded once. Come, he said softly. We have hours. And in Evernight, hours are everything. They slipped back into the city's flow, two shadows moving against the grain of a day that wanted them to forget. Above them, the aurora's blue deepened, as if the sky itself was listening. 13th Midnight came like it always did, inevitable, indifferent, and hungry. Rhovan felt the reset in his bones before he heard the final bell. The air thickened, the lamplight shivered, and the threads beneath the world drew tight as a noose. He watched Ysella in the dim of his room, watched the way she pressed the glassen shard to her tongue with deliberate care, eyes narrowed with concentration as she sealed her chosen facts into crystal. When the last note struck, the world snapped back. And this time, when the gloam bell tolled its first call, Rhovan did not wake alone. Ysella was there, standing in the center of his room as if she'd stepped into existence mid-breath, cloak half on, eyes already sharp with remembered fear. She spat the shard into her palm and stared at it like it was proof she hadn't gone mad. Then she looked at him and said, without hesitation, Kael'thorne. Rovan's chest tightened. Good, he rasped. And the archive side exit, she added quickly. Inkleaf courtyard. Black tree. Left gate. Good. Anne. Thin places, Ysella finished, voice quieter, as if the phrase carried weight she could feel but not yet name. Rhovan nodded once. It wasn't a celebration. It wasn't even relief, not fully. It was a shift in the foundation of his world, a crack that had opened and stayed open. You did it, he said, and he meant more than the memory. Ysella's hands trembled around the shard. It hurts a little, she admitted. Not like pain, like holding your breath too long. That's the pressure of the loop, Rhovan said. It doesn't like what you're doing. Ysella lifted her chin. Then it can dislike it harder. The fierce, plain defiance in her voice scraped something raw in him. Rhovan turned away before she could see how close he'd come to smiling. He moved quickly, setting water to boil, laying out his ledger, shifting the ritual objects on his table. These were the actions that kept him steady, the motions that made the day feel like it could be used instead of endured. Ysella watched him, eyes tracking every movement. So what now? She asked. We test the seams. Rovan's fingers stilled on the kettle handle. Yes, he said. But not with bravado. With method. Method, Ysella echoed, a hint of dry humor in her voice. You're going to turn rebellion into bookkeeping. It's the only way to win against something that resets mistakes, Rhovan said. He glanced at her. Eat something. I'm not hungry. That's because you're frightened, he replied, and when she started to argue, he added, softer, and because your body doesn't know if it's allowed to be real here. Ysella's mouth tightened. Then she took the piece of bread he offered and tore it in half with too much force. The sound of it tearing seemed loud in the small room. Rhovan waited until she'd swallowed a few bites. Then he slid a blank glass shard across the table. Store one more sentence, he said. Ysella's brows knit. Now, Rhovan confirmed. The loop will try to shake you later. If you lose your nerve, you'll lose your precision. We build habit before we build bravery. Ysella stared at the shard. Her fingers hovered. What sentence? Rhovan thought of Kael'thorne's eyes, of the way the courtyard air had tightened as if listening. He thought of ELD's warning. He wrote on the strip of cloth with charcoal, if he asks, lie. Ysella's gaze flicked to the words, then up to him, understanding sharpening. You think he'll find me again? I think he already has, Rhovan said. He just hasn't decided how to use you. Ysella pressed the shard to her tongue and closed her eyes. She breathed once, steadying herself, then opened them again, clearer than before. When she lowered the shard, it shimmered with a single fine thread line, no fracture. Rhovan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Good. Ysella tucked the shard away. Where's the first seam? She asked. Rovan's gaze went to the window, to the street below. The boy with the chipped tooth was running after the bun seller again, begging the same plea, hearing the same scold. The loop played its script. The city slept through its own life. The gloam bell, Rhovan said. And the aqueduct door. Ysella frowned. The warded door you tried before. Rhovan nodded. It's an access point to the Undercity. It's also a punishment. If the loop has a heart, it will be below. But we don't rush for the heart. We test the skin. He pulled on his coat. Ysella followed suit, hood up, eyes bright. They moved through Evernight with a careful kind of speed, fast enough to matter, slow enough not to draw sharp notice. Rhovan chose streets that were crowded at this hour, where their cloaks blended into the press of bodies. He avoided the clean lines of the Vesper Quarter. He avoided lantern pools too bright to hide in. At the aqueduct arch, the door waited in its stone recess like a closed eye. Rhovan stopped short of touching it this time. He let Ysella approach first. She stared at the iron latch and the dark stone around it. It feels, her voice softened, and her gaze unfocused slightly as if she were listening to something beneath sound. Thin, she whispered. Like a bruise. Rovan's thread sense flared in agreement. The wards were tight, but not seamless. There were edges here, old stitches hidden under newer ones. Ysella lifted her hand. Rhovan caught her wrist, not to stop her, but to ground her, and he did it carefully enough that she didn't recoil. Slow, he murmured. Ysella's breathing steadied. She nodded once and placed her palm against the stone beside the door, not the latch itself. The air changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash or thunder. But Rhovan felt the threads beneath the world react as if someone had plucked a single string on a harp. The ward pattern quivered, and in that quiver he sensed something like awareness. Ysella's eyes widened. It pushed back, she whispered. Yes, Rhovan said, voice tight. That means it can feel you. Ysella swallowed. What do I do? Rovan's mind raced, searching for the cleanest test. Don't force it, he said. Just tug. Like pulling the corner of a cloth to see how it's woven. Ysella's brow furrowed. Her fingers flexed against the stone. She closed her eyes. For an instant, the air brightened as if the lamplight had been given a drop of morning. Rovan's stomach clenched. He felt her through light, foreign, warm, and dangerous in Evernight's cold weave. The wards shuddered. The iron latch clicked. Ysella's eyes snapped open. Her hand jerked back as if the stone had burned her. Rhovan stared at the latch, disbelieving. In all his loops, he had never made it click. It clicked again, softer, like a breath. Then the world corrected. The latch slammed shut with a hard metallic snap, louder than it had any right to be. The ward pattern flared outward, a cold shock that slapped Rhovan's senses and made his teeth ache. The air in the alley seemed to thicken, pressing them back. Ysella staggered, grabbing the aqueduct wall for balance. Rhovan moved instantly, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. Are you hurt? Ysella shook her head, but her face had gone pale. It didn't want me to, she whispered. It noticed. Rovan's jaw tightened. He looked around. No one in the street beyond the arch had turned their head. No one had seen. But the loop had seen, and that was worse. Come, he said, voice low and urgent. We leave. Now. They slipped away into the crowd, cloaks up, heads down. Rhovan kept his hand near Ysella's sleeve, not gripping, not dragging, just close, ready if she stumbled again. He didn't know if the loop would try to correct with an accident, a patrol, a falling brick. It had teeth, and it used the city itself as a mouth. They reached a narrow stairwell that led up to a roof walkway between two tenements. Rhovan guided Ysella up, away from the street noise. The moment they were alone, Ysella rounded on him, breath sharp. It opened, she hissed. It opened and then it slammed shut, Rhovan finished. His voice stayed calm through sheer effort. Yes. Ysella's eyes were bright with anger and fear. That means I can do it again. Or it means next time it will break your hand for trying, Rhovan said. Ysella froze, swallowing hard. Rhovan forced his tone softer. You did well, he said. Better than well. You proved ELD's theory. You can tug at the stitching. Ysella's hands curled into fists. So why does it feel like we lost? Because the loop corrected immediately, Rhovan replied. It tightened the seam. It will do that every time we act too boldly. Ysella looked out over the rooftops, jaw clenched. Then we have to be smarter than it. Rhovan watched her profile in the dim light. Her hood shadowed her face, but he could see the stubborn set of her mouth, the way she refused to look away from the problem even when it scared her. It reminded him of himself, before the loop had trained the hope out of him. A quiet thought slipped through him, unwanted and sharp. If she had been here earlier, would I have given up so completely? He shoved it away before it could hurt. We need data, he said. We need to know what triggers correction and what slips through. Ysella turned back, determination returning. Then we test again. The gloam bell. Rhovan nodded. Yes. But first, he hesitated, then made himself say it. We can't do this alone. Ysella's eyes softened. Who else is there? Rhovan thought of ELD, and of Myra with the glassine shard under her tongue, and of Captain Sorin's eyes that always followed Rhovan for a heartbeat too long. Allies in a loop were a cruel concept, people you used and then watched forget. There was one person, though, who lived on the edge of law and memory, whose survival depended on noticing cracks in systems. Varric Pell, Rhovan said. A relic runner. He knows the undercity routes. Ysella's brows rose. You trust him? No, Rhovan said flatly. But I understand him. That's the closest thing to trust one can afford. Ysella studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then we find him. They found Varric Pell where he always was at this hour, behind the spice stalls in the market, leaning against a stack of crates like the world owed him comfort. He had a narrow face and quick hands, the kind of hands that could steal a ring and leave you feeling grateful for the attention. His coat was patched, his boots scuffed, and his eyes bright with the restless energy of a man who had never believed safety was guaranteed. When he saw Rhovan, he grinned. Well, he drawled. If it isn't Evernight's loneliest ghost. Rhovan ignored the jab. I need a route, he said. Varric's grin sharpened. To where? The sealed places, Rhovan said. Varric's eyes narrowed. That's expensive. Ysella, beside Rhovan, shifted slightly, as if preparing to argue. Rhovan touched her sleeve lightly, a warning to stay quiet. I can pay, Rhovan said. Varric snorted. With what? You can't even keep a coin in your pocket if the city decides it doesn't like you. Rhovan's jaw tightened. He reached into his belt sleeve and pulled out a glassine shard, one of ELD's blanks, now threaded with a single crisp line. He held it up between two fingers. Varric's eyes went hungry. That's not blank, he murmured. No, Rhovan agreed. It's a memory. Varric's gaze flicked to Ysella. New friend, he noted, voice too casual. You collecting strays now, Sairn? Ysella's chin lifted. I'm not a stray. Varric's eyebrows rose. Oh, she bites. That's a rarity around here. Rhovan's patience thinned. Route, he repeated. And discretion. Varric tapped the crate with two fingers, thinking. I could take you down, he said slowly. But if the Vespers catch wind. They already have, Rhovan said. Varric went still. His grin faded just enough to show the sharpness beneath. Then you're a fool, he said, and his gaze flicked again to Ysella. Or desperate. Rhovan didn't correct him. Ysella's voice was quiet, steady. If the city resets, why do you care what happens? She asked Varric. Varric's mouth twitched. Because some things don't reset clean, he said, and the brief shadow in his eyes was gone before Ysella could grasp it. Because even in a loop, you can end up with fewer fingers than you started with. Rhovan watched him closely. Varric had always been good at dodging truth, but that line had landed too near something real. Varric looked at the shard again. What memory? Rhovan held it out. A route, he lied smoothly. A safe path. Something you can use. Varric's eyes narrowed, suspicious. You want me to trust a crystal I can't read? You can read it, Ysella said suddenly. If you learn. Varric blinked at her, then laughed softly. Listen to that. Hope, with teeth. Rhovan felt the loop's pressure again, subtle, like a tightening in the market's air, a reminder that they were standing in a public place speaking too near forbidden things. Varric must have felt it too, because his humor sharpened into practicality. Fine, he said. I'll take you down. But not today. Ysella bristled. Why not? Because you're being watched, Varric said, eyes flicking toward the cleaner stone at the edge of the market where Vesper eyes liked to linger. And because if you push the city too hard in one day, it pushes back. Rhovan's jaw tightened. Then when? Varric shrugged. When the crowd is thickest and the watch is stupidest. 11th hour. Dock quarter. Meet by the broken lantern post. Rhovan nodded once. Done. Varric's gaze slid to Ysella again. Bring your bite, he said lightly. You'll need it. Then he vanished into the crowd like a fish slipping into dark water. They moved away from the market, heading toward the bell tower district where the Glomebell's mechanism lived. The streets narrowed here, the stones darker, the air colder. The bell's sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, a vibration that lived in your teeth. Ysella glanced at Rhovan as they walked. You lied to him, she murmured. Yes. What memory is in that shard, then? Rhovan hesitated. Honesty with her felt more dangerous than it should have. Nothing yet, he admitted. But it will be. Ysella's gaze sharpened. You're going to pay him with something real. Rhovan didn't answer. You're going to give him a memory, Ysella pressed, voice low. A real one that will survive. Rhovan's chest tightened. It's currency, he said, too sharply. Ysella stopped short, forcing him to stop with her in the shadow of a soot-stained archway. Her eyes were bright with frustration. People's lives aren't currency. Rhovan's voice went quiet, dangerous. In Evernight, they are. Ysella's jaw clenched, but she didn't flinch away from him. She stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that her warmth brushed the air around him. Then we change Evernight, she said, and the steadiness in her voice made the words land like a vow. We don't become it. Rhovan stared at her, something raw stirring in him. He had been alone so long that morality had turned into a private thing, a quiet set of rules he followed because he couldn't bear to stop caring, even when caring hurt. Ysella's rule was different. It wasn't private. It was chosen out loud. For a moment, he didn't trust it. Hope had always been the loop's cruelest bait. Then he realized something that startled him more, he didn't want to break it. All right, he said, voice rough. No stolen memories. We pay him with use. Ysella blinked. Use. Information, Rhovan clarified. Roots. Patterns. Ways to stay alive. That's what he values. Ysella exhaled, tension easing. Good. They reached the bell tower at the 6th hour. It rose from the stone like a dark tooth, its surface carved with ward glyphs that had been worn smooth by time that didn't move, but still wore things down in small, relentless ways. The Gloam bell itself hung inside, immense and dull bronze, its mouth aimed at the city as if it were forever about to swallow it. Rhovan didn't enter through the front. He led Ysella around the tower's base to a maintenance door half hidden behind stacked firewood. He lifted the latch, slipping inside as he always did. The interior smelled of metal and old wax. Narrow stairs spiraled upward along the bell chamber's wall. The hum of wards was stronger here, a constant low vibration that made Ysella's shoulders tense. It's loud, she whispered. It's the knot point, Rhovan said. If Evernight's weave has a center stitch above ground, it's here. They climbed, careful. Rhovan knew every squeak in the stair. He stepped over the one loose plank that always creaked. Ysella mirrored him, quick to learn. At the bell's level, the space opened into a chamber where the bronze hung like a moon. Beneath it, the mechanism was not gears and ropes as one might expect, but something stranger, an arrangement of star iron rings suspended in midair, each ring etched with tiny thread glyphs that pulsed faintly when the bell breathed. Ysella stared. "That's not a bell rope," she whispered. "No," Rhovan said. His thread sense prickled. The rings were time thread work, dangerous, expensive, and arrogant. "It's a tuning structure. It tells the loop when to fold." Ysella stepped closer, eyes narrowed. She lifted her hand, then hesitated. "If I touch it, it may bite you," Rhovan said. "Or worse, it may mark you." Ysella looked at him. "You're already marked." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Rovan's throat tighten. He glanced down at his wrist, at the pale ink band. "Yes," he said softly. "And I didn't choose it." Isella's gaze lingered on his wrist with something like anger on his behalf. Then she looked back at the rings. "If it's a seam, then it's a seam we have to test." Rovan's instincts screamed caution. But he had brought her here. He had chosen to trust the possibility she represented. And if he didn't let her try, he would be choosing the loop again. "Once," he said. "A light touch. If it reacts, you stop immediately." Ysella nodded. She reached out and brushed her fingertips against the lowest star iron ring. The world shivered. Rhovan felt it in his teeth, in his bones, in the ink band on his wrist. The ring's glyphs flared brighter for an instant, as if startled. The air in the chamber tightened, pushing back against Isella's hand. Isella's eyes widened. "It's pulling," she whispered. "Pulling you or pulling the seam closed," Rhovan said. Ysella swallowed. Her expression sharpened. She didn't push. She didn't force. Instead, she did exactly what Rhovan had asked at the aqueduct. She tugged lightly, experimentally, at the edge of whatever held the ring's pattern in place. A faint sound echoed through the chamber, not a bell note but a thin, high whine, like a thread being stretched too far. Rovan's pulse spiked. "Stop," he snapped. Ysella jerked her hand back instantly. The whine ceased. For a moment, nothing happened. The ring's glow dimmed. Then the loop corrected. The bell, silent, unmoving, rang anyway. Not with sound, but with force. A pressure wave slammed through the chamber, dropping Ysella to one knee and sending Rhovan staggering. Dust fell from the ceiling. The star iron rings trembled violently, their glyphs flashing like frantic eyes. Rhovan caught the railing, teeth clenched. Pain flared along his wrist mark, burning cold. Ysella gasped, one hand pressed to her chest as if she couldn't find breath. Rhovan lunged toward her, dropping to a crouch. "Ysella," he said sharply. "Look at me. Breathe." Her eyes were wide, panicked. She tried to inhale and couldn't. Rhovan didn't think. He reached into thread sense and knotted a steadying weave into the air around her, nothing time-touched, nothing complex, just a reinforcement of breath and calm. The moment the weave settled, Isella's lungs obeyed again. She sucked in air in a ragged gulp. Rovan's relief was immediate, and then so was the cost. A sharp stab of cold went through his skull, like a needle of ice behind his eyes. For a heartbeat, the chamber blurred. Rhovan blinked hard, steadying himself. Isella's hand found his sleeve, fingers gripping. "What was that?" she rasped. "The loop warning us," Rhovan said, voice tight. He forced his thoughts into order. "It doesn't want you touching the tuning rings." Ysella swallowed, still breathing hard. "But it reacted. It can be disturbed." "Yes," Rhovan said, and despite the pain behind his eyes, something fierce sparked in him. "Yes." Ysella looked at him, eyes bright. "We're not helpless." "No," Rhovan agreed. She glanced down at his hand on her shoulder, as if just now realizing he was touching her. She didn't pull away. Her grip on his sleeve loosened slowly, fingers sliding a fraction, lingering an unconscious check that he was real. Rhovan felt that small contact like heat under his skin. He withdrew carefully, not because he wanted distance, but because he didn't trust himself to stay steady if she looked at him too long with that kind of gratitude and determination. "We leave," he said, voice rough. "Before the watch feels the correction." Ysella nodded, pushing to her feet. She swayed, and Rhovan caught her elbow automatically. This time, she let him. They descended the stairwell in silence, moving quickly. The bell tower's wards still hummed, irritated. Rhovan could feel the loop's attention trailing them like a scent. Outside, the street looked unchanged. People moved, bargained, laughed, argued, the day continuing as if the bell tower hadn't just tried to crush them for touching its hidden threads. Evernight's cruelty was often quiet. They didn't slow until they reached a rooftop again, away from the bell's vibration. Ysella leaned against a chimney, breathing hard, cheeks pale. I thought it was going to, she swallowed. I thought it was going to stop my heart. It might have, Rhovan said bluntly. Ysella's eyes flashed. Then why bring me? The question was sharp, but not accusing. It was desperate for honesty. Rhovan stared at her for a long moment. The answer that rose in him was not strategy. It was not logic. It was the truth he rarely allowed himself to feel. Because when you fell through that rift, he said quietly, you were the first thing that wasn't already written. Ysella's breath caught. Rhovan looked away, jaw tight. Because I can't break this alone. Ysella's voice softened. And you think I can? I think you might, Rhovan admitted. And I think the loop knows it. Ysella stood very still. The wind lifted the edge of her hood, showing a strand of her dark hair, damp with sweat. She looked at him as if seeing him more clearly than he wanted. The mark, she said softly, gaze dropping to his wrist. It hurt just now. Rhovan's fingers flexed unconsciously. It always hurts when the loop tightens, he said. It's a reminder. A leash. Ysella stepped closer. This time, she did touch him very lightly, 2 fingertips against the pale ink band, as if afraid pressure might hurt. Rhovan's breath stuttered. Not from pain. From the shock of tenderness aimed directly at the thing that had always been used to control him. What does it do? Ysella asked, voice low. Rhovan swallowed. The cold needle behind his eyes pulsed again, and with it came the faint sense of something missing, like reaching for a familiar object in a pocket and finding only cloth. He frowned. It binds my memory, he said slowly. It tethers me to the loop so I remember even when everything resets. That's why you're the anchor, Ysella whispered. Rhovan nodded once. Ysella's brow furrowed. Then why did you look like you were in pain when you helped me breathe? Rhovan went still. He hadn't told her about costs. He hadn't wanted to burden her with the truth yet. But she was observant, and the loop did not allow lies to sit comfortably. He took a slow breath. Thread binding has a price, he said. Ysella's fingers withdrew from his wrist, but she didn't step away. What price? Rhovan hesitated, then forced the truth into words. When you weave close to time, when you disturb the loop's stitching, it pushes back. Sometimes it hurts your body. Sometimes, his throat tightened. Sometimes it takes memory. Ysella's eyes widened. It takes your memories? Rhovan nodded, jaw clenched. Small ones at first. Details. Sensations. The names of flowers. The shape of a song. Ysella's face tightened. What did it take just now? Rhovan reached into himself, searching. He saw his table. He saw his kettle. He saw Ysella falling through light. He saw Myra's garden. He tried to recall the taste of bitter leaf tea from his first loop, how it had surprised him, how he'd thought it tasted like winter herbs and home. The memory wasn't there. He blinked hard, startled by the emptiness. I don't know, he admitted hoarsely. Ysella's mouth tightened with pain that wasn't hers, and yet she wore it. That's not fair. Rhovan let out a bitter breath. Evernight is not built on fairness. Ysella stared at him, and in her eyes he saw a decision hardening, not reckless, but resolute. Then we can't let you pay all the costs, she said. Rhovan's chest tightened. You can't take them for me. Maybe not, Ysella said, voice steady. But I can be careful. I can store what matters. I can, she swallowed. I can help you hold on. The words, help you hold on, landed with quiet force. Rhovan looked away because if he looked at her too long, he might do something foolish like believe her. A bell tolled in the distance, marking the 7th hour. The day marched on. Rhovan pulled himself back into motion. We need proof, he said. Something we can show ourselves each loop. Something that confirms the loop is harming people, not just trapping them. Ysella's gaze sharpened. The archive, she said. ELD mentioned it sings when something new enters. And he said he was tired of people forgetting what they deserved to keep. Rhovan nodded. There are shelves in the archive that are always almost empty, he said. Not because the memory shards don't exist, but because they're moved. Hidden. Hidden from whom? Ysella asked. Rovan's jaw tightened. From the Vespers. From the loop itself. From anyone who might use them to unravel the story Evernight tells itself. Ysella's hands curled. Then we find the hidden place. Rhovan looked at the sky. The aurora's colors were muted at this hour, waiting for their nightly flare. The city would grow more dangerous as the day approached its end, patrols tightening, Vesper eyes sharpening, the loop's patience thinning. But if they waited, they would lose the chance. Now, Rhovan said. They returned to the glass archive in the 8th hour, entering through the main doors with their hoods up and their steps measured. Rhovan kept his face half-shadowed. Ysella stayed close, moving in his wake. Inside, the hum of memory wrapped around them like cold silk. ELD was at his desk, sorting shards with practiced calm. When he saw them, his hands stilled for the smallest moment. Then his gaze flicked, imperceptibly, to the right, toward a narrower aisle near the back wall. A direction. Rovan's pulse quickened. He didn't thank ELD aloud. Thanks could be overheard and interpreted. He simply nodded once and guided Ysella deeper. As they moved among the shelves, Ysella whispered, his helping. Yes, Rhovan murmured. Quietly. How long has he? A long time, Rhovan said, and there was grief in it. They reached the indicated aisle. Here, the labels on the crystal spines were older, ink faded, handwriting more ornate. Rovan's thread sense prickled. The wards along this section were different, subtler, meant to conceal rather than protect. Ysella paused, eyes narrowed. It feels muffled, she whispered. Rhovan nodded. A hush weave. He ran his fingers along the shelf edge, feeling for the seam where ELD had hidden an opening. His touch found a notch, tiny, deliberate, near a label that read history, founding 08s. Rhovan pressed. The shelf shivered and slid inward soundlessly, revealing a narrow gap leading into darkness. Ysella's breath caught. A hidden chamber. Rovan's pulse hammered. He had suspected it existed, but suspicion was not the same as confirmation. Quickly, he whispered, and slipped inside, Ysella close behind. The hidden chamber was small, the air colder, the hum of wards thick enough to feel like pressure against skin. The walls were lined with glassin, hundreds of shards fitted into slots like a mosaic. Each one held a memory sealed away from the reset. In the center of the room stood a single pedestal, and on it lay a crystal cylinder the size of Rovan's forearm, cloudy with layers of stored thought. Ysella stepped closer, eyes wide with awe. All of this survives, she whispered. Yes, Rhovan said, voice rough. This is what they don't want people to know. Ysella reached out, fingers hovering over one of the wall shards. Can I? Not yet, Rhovan warned. Touching them could trigger a ward alarm. Ysella withdrew her hand. Her gaze went to the pedestal cylinder. What's that? Rhovan studied it. His thread sense tingled, recognizing the weave's shape older than the Vesper's current work, deeper, more fundamental. A core record, he murmured. A founding memory. Ysella swallowed. If we could read it, we might understand why Evernight is like this, Rhovan finished. His hand hovered over the cylinder. Reading a memory crystal wasn't like reading ink. It required threading your mind into someone else's preserved thought, letting it play inside your skull. It was intimate. Dangerous. The loop could bite. Ysella's voice softened. Don't, she said quietly. Not if it costs you more. Rovan's chest tightened. We need it. We need you, Ysella corrected. The words landed hard. Rhovan stared at her, and in her eyes he saw not naivety, but a kind of fierce care he hadn't asked for and didn't know how to refuse without becoming a colder man than he wanted to be. He drew a slow breath. Then we do it differently, he said. He pulled out one of ELD's blank shards and held it up. You store what we learn, he said. Not me. Ysella blinked. But I don't know how to read. You know how to hold an outside seam, Rhovan said. That might be enough. He hesitated, then added, "And I'll guide you." Ysella's throat bobbed. "Together," she whispered. Rhovan nodded once. He placed the blank shard in her palm, then guided her hand toward the cylinder without touching the cylinder himself. He kept his own fingers lightly around her wrist, not restraining, but steadying. "Breathe," he murmured. "Select what you want. Facts. Images. Don't pour everything." Ysella's eyes closed. She pressed the shard to her tongue briefly, then lowered it and, with a careful inhale, placed her fingertips against the crystal cylinder. The ward pressure surged. Ysella flinched, but she held. Rhovan felt through light stir around her like warm air rising in a cold room. The chamber's muffling wards trembled as if startled by something that didn't belong. The cylinder's cloudy surface brightened faintly, and a flicker of images bled into the air, so faint Rhovan might have imagined them if not for the way Ysella's breath caught. "What do you see?" he whispered. Ysella's voice was shaky. "A hall," she murmured. "Stone. Tall windows, but outside is bright. Bright like morning." Rovan's stomach tightened. Morning. A word that felt like a myth. Ysella's fingers trembled. "There are people," she continued. 3, no, 4. They're arguing. A woman in black says, "If dawn completes, the city burns." And someone replies, "Then we bind the day." Rovan's pulse hammered. "Vesper," he breathed. Ysella's brows knit. Sweat beaded at her hairline. "The woman in black has a ring," she whispered. "Silver thread inlaid. She says, we require an anchor. Someone must remember the pattern." Rovan's throat went tight. He could feel the mark on his wrist pulsing coldly, as if recognizing the words. Ysella's eyes snapped open, wide with horror. "Rhovan," she whispered, and his name sounded like pain. "It was you." Rhovan went still. The chamber felt suddenly too small, the ward pressure pressing in like stone walls tightening. Ysella swallowed hard, voice shaking. "Not you," she corrected quickly, struggling for precision through fear. "But, a younger man. Same eyes." "Same," she swallowed again. They grab his wrist. "They ink the band. He says, 'I'll help you save the city.' And the woman says, 'No. You will help us keep it.'" Rovan's vision blurred for a moment. He blinked hard, forcing himself to breathe. He had remembered pieces, over years, glimpses of hands, words, pain, but not like this. Not so clearly. Not spoken aloud by someone who could still choose outrage. Ysella's lips parted. "They lied to you," she whispered. Rovan's voice came out rough. "I volunteered," he said, and he hated the defensiveness in it. "I thought," he stopped. The thought had no end. He had thought too many things in those early days. Ysella's eyes shone. "You thought you could fix it," she said, as if understanding was both comfort and grief. "And they turned you into a lock." Rovan's jaw clenched. He forced himself back into function before the emotion could drown him. "Store it," he said tightly. "Store what you saw. The names if you can. The phrase. Everything about the binding." Ysella nodded frantically. She pressed the shard to her tongue, eyes squeezed shut, and whispered through clenched teeth, "Anchor, bind the day, if dawn completes, the city burns." The cylinder's glow flared suddenly, and Ysella gasped, yanking her hand back as if burned. The chamber shuddered. Rovan's thread sense screamed warning. The muffling wards around them tightened, then trembled, as if the loop were tugging at the chamber's seam. The air grew dense, difficult to breathe. "It noticed," Ysella whispered, fear sharp. "Yes," Rhovan said. "We leave." They backed toward the hidden shelf opening, but the shelf had slid shut. Rovan's stomach dropped. He pressed his palm against the stone edge, searching for the notch. It wasn't there. Or it was and the loop had blurred it. Ysella's breath hitched. "Rhovan." Rhovan forced calm. "Stand back," he said. He could try to thread bind it open, but if the loop was already paying attention, any weave might cost him memory he couldn't afford to lose. And if he lost more, Ysella would be left with shards and no guide. He looked at Ysella's face, pale and determined in the dim chamber. He saw the shard in her hand, still intact, faintly shimmering. An outside thread. "Ysella," he said, voice low. The seam. Use through light. The shelf is part of the concealment weave. Pull it gently. Ysella's eyes widened. I don't know if I can. You did at the aqueduct, Rhovan said. This is the same kind of edge. Feel for the thinness and tug. Ysella swallowed. She stepped to the shelf wall and pressed her palm flat against it. Her breathing slowed, deliberate. Her face tightened with concentration. Rhovan watched the air around her shift subtle warmth, like a distant sunrise trying to exist. The chamber wards hissed softly in his thread sense, resisting. Ysella's fingers flexed as if gripping an invisible thread. The shelf shivered. It slid open with a soundless sigh. Ysella staggered, catching herself on the pedestal. Go, she rasped. Rhovan grabbed her elbow and pulled her through the opening just as the shelf began to slide shut again behind them, like a mouth snapping at their heels. They emerged into the archive aisle, breathing hard, hoods up. The hum of public wards felt almost gentle compared to the hidden chamber's pressure. Ysella's eyes were bright with shock. I saw it, she whispered. I saw you. Rovan's jaw clenched. His mind felt too full and too empty at once, full of the image she described, empty of the memory he should have had himself. He glanced at his wrist mark. The pale ink band looked the same. It always did. The loop did not show its scars openly. Store it again, he murmured. As soon as we're safe. Double seal. The loop will try to make you doubt what you saw. Ysella nodded, clutching the shard to her chest as if it were fragile life. They moved toward the entrance, but as they neared the front desk, ELD's gaze flicked up sharply, then toward the door. Warning. Rovan's pulse spiked. He followed ELD's glance. Warden Calethorn stood just inside the archive doors, cloak immaculate, posture relaxed as a cat that knows the room belongs to it. 2 Vesper agents flanked him. Their eyes scanned the archive with polite attention that hid razor intent. Calethorn's gaze landed on Rovan's hood. Then, slowly, it slid to Ysella. A small smile curved his mouth. Rovan's stomach tightened. The loop's pressure returned, cold fingers at the back of his neck. Calethorn stepped forward, voice soft and cultured. Visitors, he said, as if greeting friends. I'm afraid the archive will be closing early. ELD's face remained composed behind the desk. It is not yet the 9th hour, he said calmly. Calethorn's smile widened. House Vesper has requested a private consult. His eyes remained on Ysella. For matters of irregularity. Ysella's breath hitched. Rhovan leaned slightly toward her, murmuring without moving his lips, "Don't speak." Ysella's fingers tightened around the shard in her pocket, and Rhovan prayed she wouldn't reach for it. A shard could be taken. A shard could be broken. Calethorn's gaze sharpened as if he sensed thought passing between them. He lifted one hand, palm up. You, he said to Ysella, voice pleasant. Remove your hood. Ysella went still. Rhovan felt his mark burn cold. He stepped forward half a pace. Warden, he said evenly. You have no authority over patrons inside the archive. Calethorn's eyes flicked to him, amused. Ah, he murmured. So you admit your patrons. Rhovan didn't respond. Words were snares. Calethorn's gaze returned to Ysella. Remove it, he repeated, and the pleasantness in his voice thinned into steel. Ysella's chin lifted. Rhovan felt a jolt of grim admiration and fear. If she defied him openly, the loop would correct. The Vespers would act. Evernight would bite. Before she could speak, ELD's voice cut in, calm as water. Warden Calethorn, he said, if House Vesper seeks irregularities, perhaps you should begin with the inner shelves. This archive records the city's compliance as well as its deviations. Calethorn's gaze snapped to ELD, irritation flashing briefly. It was the first crack in his composure. Keeper, he said softly, I would advise you not to forget your station. ELD's expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the desk edge. I am the station, he replied, voice polite. This is the archive. A beat of silence. Then Calethorn's smile returned, colder. Very well, he said. We'll be thorough. He motioned his agents forward. Rhovan didn't wait. He caught Ysella's sleeve and guided her toward the side exit, the Inkleaf courtyard, moving with the flow of patrons shifting out of the agent's way. Ysella obeyed, eyes wide, breathing shallow. They slipped through the side door into the courtyard, where the black-leaved tree stood rigid against the dim sky. The moment the door shut behind them, Ysella exhaled a ragged breath. "He's hunting me," she whispered. "He's hunting what you represent," Rhovan corrected. "Choice." Ysella's eyes flashed. "Then we don't let him take it." Rovan's mind raced, calculating routes, hours, risks. "We meet Varric at the 11th, he said. We go down. We find proof of the nocturne heart. We find a way to weaken the loop from below." Ysella swallowed. "And the memory cylinder?" "You stored it," Rhovan said. "That's what matters." Ysella nodded, then hesitated. "Rhovan." He looked at her. Her gaze dropped to his wrist mark again, then lifted to his eyes. "You said you volunteered," she said softly. "Because you thought you were saving the city." Rovan's jaw tightened. Ysella stepped closer. Her voice lowered. "That wasn't foolish," she said. "That was good." The word good, aimed at him, felt like a foreign spell. Rovan's throat tightened. He had been called many things in Evernight: anchor, warden, traitor, necessary but not good. He didn't know how to hold it. Ysella's hand rose, hesitated in the air between them, then settled lightly on his forearm. Not a claim, not a demand, just warmth and steadiness. Rhovan felt the contact like an anchor of his own choosing. "We're going to finish what you started," Ysella whispered. "But this time, you don't do it for them. You do it for you. And for everyone who never got to choose tomorrow." Rhovan swallowed hard. He covered her hand with his briefly, carefully, then let it go before emotion could turn reckless. "11th hour," he said, voice rough. "Dock quarter." Ysella nodded. 11th hour. They left the courtyard and slipped into the city's streets, where Evernight continued its endless performance. But now, beneath the script, a different story had begun to write itself, one shard at a time. As the day slid toward evening, the aurora above deepened in color, and the loop's pressure grew more insistent. Rhovan felt it watching, waiting, preparing its correction. And still, beside him, Ysella walked with her shoulders squared, her grip firm around the memory shard that carried the truth of his binding. For the first time in years, Rhovan felt something he hadn't dared to name. Not certainty. Not victory. But a fragile, dangerous sense that the next reset might not erase everything that mattered. The 11th hour in Evernight always tasted of metal. Not because the air changed, though it did, subtly, as if the city's breath shortened, but because the loop began to brace itself. Rhovan felt it the way a practiced hand feels a storm before the first drop, a pressure behind the eyes, a faint ringing in the teeth, the cold, watchful pulse of the ink band on his wrist. By the time they reached the dock quarter, the lamplight had grown whiter and harder, and the harbor's black water lay too still, reflecting the night wreath as if the sky were trapped in it. Varric Pell waited by the broken lantern post like he'd promised, leaning with casual precision, one boot on a mooring stone. He looked up when they approached and gave them a quick, assessing glance. Rovan's hood, Ysella's set jaw, the way they moved too carefully for ordinary citizens. "Late," Varric said, though the bell hadn't tolled yet. "You're early," Rhovan replied. Varric's grin flickered. "I'm cautious." His gaze slid to Ysella. "Still got your bite?" Ysella's eyes narrowed. "Still got your excuses?" Varric chuckled softly, as if genuinely delighted. Then his humor faded, and he jerked his chin toward the nearest alley. "We don't linger out here," he muttered. "Too many clean stones. Too many eyes." Rovan's thread sense prickled. He'd already felt it, the thin, invisible brush of ward attention skimming the dock quarter like a net. Vesper agents didn't patrol here openly, but they liked to watch from a distance, letting the harbor's bustle do the work of concealment. They followed Varric into the alley, where the smell of fish brine and tar thickened. He led them past stacked crates and shuttered warehouses until they reached a low, half-collapsed stairwell that vanished under a warehouse foundation. Varric crouched and knocked twice on a stone that looked no different from any other. A faint click answered, subtle, almost imagined. "Down," Varric said. And don't touch anything that's humming. If it's humming, it's hungry. Ysella glanced at Rhovan. He nodded once. They descended. The Undercity swallowed lamplight quickly. The air grew colder, damp heavy against skin, carrying the mineral scent of old stone and stagnant water. Rhovan's thread sense flared as soon as the stairs turned. Down here, the weave was louder, denser, threaded through every arch and brick as if the city's bones were wrapped in spellwork. Varric moved like he belonged in darkness, one hand skimming the wall, fingers finding cracks and notches that were invisible to the eye. "Stay close," he murmured. "If you drift, you'll end up in a loop pocket." Ysella frowned. A loop pocket? Varric didn't look back. Little folded bits of time. You take a wrong turn and suddenly you're walking the same corridor forever until the reset pulls you out. Rhovan's jaw tightened. "You've been in one." "Once," Varric said, too quickly. "Didn't care for it." They reached a tunnel that sloped down toward the sound of water. Rhovan's wrist mark pulsed coldly, as if recognizing the descent. His stomach tightened. The deeper he went, the more the loop seemed to press in, like it disliked being approached at its roots. Ysella walked beside him, shoulders rigid beneath her cloak. Her hand stayed near her pocket where the memory shards were tucked. Rhovan didn't blame her. Those shards were more than crystal now, they were proof that the city could be defied. Varric stopped at a narrow iron gate sealed into the tunnel wall. It was old, rust-pitted, and wrapped with faint ward glyphs that shimmered like a warning under Rhovan's thread sense. "This is as far as I go," Varric said quietly. Rhovan narrowed his eyes. "You said you'd take us down." "I did," Varric snapped back. His bravado cracked enough to show real fear. "This gate is Vesper work. Past it, you're in the nocturne lanes. That's where they keep the heart stuff. That's where things look back." Ysella's gaze sharpened. "You've seen it." Varric's jaw worked. "I've seen enough to know I like my lungs inside my body." Rhovan stepped closer, voice low. "Open it." Varric laughed once, humorless. "You think I can open Vesper wards?" Rhovan didn't answer. He simply looked at Ysella. Ysella's throat bobbed. She stepped forward, palm hovering near the gate. "If I pull too hard, it corrects," she murmured. "Don't pull," Rhovan said. "Listen for the seam. Find the thinness." Ysella closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, deliberate. Rhovan watched the air around her shift, warmth rising like a memory of morning in a place built for night. Varric muttered something under his breath and edged back as if afraid the air itself might bite. Ysella placed her fingertips against the iron. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ward pattern quivered, subtle as a sigh. Ysella's brows knit. "It's layered," she whispered. "Like cloth over chain." "Pick the cloth," Rhovan murmured. "Not the chain." Ysella inhaled and tugged gently, so gently it looked like nothing at all. The glyphs dimmed. The gate's latch clicked. Varric swore softly. "Saints preserve." Rhovan pushed the gate open just enough to slip through. Ysella followed, then Rhovan turned back. Varric stood frozen, staring at the open gate as if it were a prophecy. Rhovan held out a small glassen shard, one of ELD's blanks, now threaded with a crisp, simple line. "A map," he said quietly. "Not of the Undercity. Of patrol routes. Dock quarter patterns. Where the Vespers look and where they don't." Varric's eyes flicked to it, hungry, then wary. "You're paying me in knowledge," he murmured. "You said you wanted something useful," Rhovan replied. Varric hesitated, then snatched the shard and shoved it into his pocket. His gaze darted to Ysella. "You two are going to get yourselves erased," he said, voice tight. "Not reset, erased." Ysella's chin lifted. "Then don't follow." Varric's mouth twitched like he might smile, but fear held it back. "I won't," he said. "But," he looked at Rhovan, expression sharpening. "If you make a hole in this city, Sairn, make it a clean one." Rhovan nodded once, because that was the closest thing to agreement he could offer. Then he pulled the gate shut behind them. The sound of the latch settling echoed too loudly in the tunnel. The nocturne lanes were not built like the rest of the Undercity. Here, the stonework was smoother, the arches higher, the air colder. Thin veins of star iron ran through the walls like frozen lightning, etched with glyphs that pulsed faintly in rhythm with the distant bells above. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold. Ysella drew in a shaky breath. "It feels like the city's spine," she whispered. "It's close," Rhovan said. "Too close." They moved forward. The corridor branched, then branched again, forming a maze designed not just to confuse but to exhaust. Rhovan's thread sense caught ward lines crossing and recrossing like netting. Some wards were old Vesper craft, tight, precise. Others felt older still, like something built before the houses learned to name themselves. "You can read the weave," Ysella whispered as they walked, voice low enough not to travel. "Can't you guide us through the least guarded path?" Rhovan's jaw tightened. "I can guide us through what I've survived before," he said. "But not through what they change." Ysella's gaze flicked to him. "They can change things inside the same day." "The Vespers can," Rhovan admitted. "And when they do, the loop adjusts around it." Ysella swallowed. "So every time we push, they push back." "Yes," Rhovan said. "And the loop pushes too." Ahead, the corridor widened into a circular chamber where a black pool sat perfectly still. Above it, a ring of star iron hovered in midair, glyphs flickering like eyelids. Rhovan stopped. Ysella stopped too. "What is it?" "A threshold ward," Rhovan said, voice tight. "It measures what passes. It knows what belongs." Ysella's hand went instinctively to her pocket. Rhovan caught her wrist gently. "Not yet," he murmured. "We don't provoke it with stored memory. We slip." "How?" Rhovan stared at the hovering ring, thread sense probing. The ward structure was elegant, woven to detect time thread anomalies. Which meant it would feel Ysella like a thorn. He thought quickly. His mind's ledger flipped through options, rejecting the reckless ones. He could not a muffling weave around them, but weaving close to time in a threshold ward would invite backlash. He could try to unspool the ward's sensitivity, too risky, too slow. Then he noticed something small. The ward ring's glyphs pulsed in a pattern, 3 flickers, pause, 2 flickers. Like breath. "It's tuned to bell cadence," he murmured. Ysella frowned. So it opens slightly on the 3rd flicker," Rhovan said. "A fraction of a fraction. Enough for air. Maybe enough for us, if we move exactly right." Ysella's eyes widened. "We sprint through in a heartbeat." "We don't sprint," Rhovan corrected. "We move like we belong. A ward expects panic." Ysella's mouth tightened, but she nodded. Rhovan watched the pulse. 1, 2, 3. "Now," he breathed. They stepped forward together, not running, not hesitating, moving with the calm pace of people who had every right to pass. The air thickened as they crossed the pool's edge. Rhovan felt the ward ring's attention sweep over them. His wrist mark flared cold, painful. Ysella's breath hitched beside him. He didn't look at her, he kept his gaze forward, steady. For a breathless moment, the ward held. Then Ysella stumbled. Not because her foot caught, Rhovan would have heard it, but because the air itself pushed. The ward ring reacted like a startled creature, glyphs flaring bright. Rhovan's stomach dropped. He reached out and caught Ysella's elbow, anchoring her posture, forcing stillness into both of them. The ward ring's glow flickered, uncertain. Rhovan held his breath. Ysella straightened, jaw clenched, and forced her breathing into calm. The ward ring dimmed again. They moved on. Only when they were beyond the pool chamber did Rhovan exhale. Ysella's voice was a whisper. "It tried to throw me out." "Yes," Rhovan said. "And it will try again." "How many wards like that are there?" "Enough," he murmured. They continued deeper, moving from chamber to corridor, corridor to stair. The Undercity's sounds shifted, water dripping, distant metal groaning, the faintest hum of something vast and awake below. With each step, Rhovan felt the day narrowing around them. The 11th hour was sliding toward the 12th. The aurora above would be flaring soon. The reset would come, and they were still descending, still chasing the heart. Finally, they reached a door unlike the aqueduct's punished gate or the tower's hidden mechanism. This door was seamless. A smooth slab of dark stone set into an arch of star iron, its surface unbroken by latch, hinge, or keyhole. Only one thing marked it, a pale band of ink embedded in the stone at wrist height, so similar to Rhovan's own mark that his skin crawled. Ysella stared. "That's the anchor seal," Rhovan said hoarsely. His wrist mark burned cold in response, as if recognizing its origin. Ysella's voice shook. "This is where they bound you." Rhovan swallowed. "Or where they bound the loop to me." He didn't want to step closer. Every instinct in him screamed that this was a trap designed not just for bodies but for hearts. But he had chosen this. He stepped forward. The moment he did, the pale ink band in the stone warmed, then pulsed. The surface of the door shimmered as if it were water pretending to be rock. A voice spoke. Not aloud, not in the air, but directly inside Rhovan's skull, smooth and calm, like a hand on the back of his neck. "Rhovan Sairn." He went still. Ysella's hand caught his sleeve. "Did you?" "Quiet," Rhovan whispered, though his throat felt tight. The voice continued, gentle as poison. "You have returned early." Rhovan's jaw clenched. "It knows me," he murmured. Ysella's eyes widened. "The door knows you." "It's not just a door," Rhovan said. "It's a weave interface. A listening ward." The voice spoke again, and this time Ysella flinched as if she heard it too, not with ears, but with whatever part of her could sense seams. "You have brought an unthreaded element." Ysella's breath caught. Rhovan's mark burned cold enough to sting tears into his eyes. He forced his voice steady. "We are leaving." "No," the voice said, still gentle. "You are correcting." The air thickened. The corridor behind them felt suddenly longer, as if distance had been stretched. Ysella's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "It's trying to trap us." Rhovan's mind raced. He could turn back, but he could already feel the corridor warping, loop pressure folding space like cloth. He looked at Ysella. "Can you pull it open?" he asked quietly. Ysella swallowed hard. "Maybe," she whispered. "But it will notice." "It already has," Rhovan said. Ysella's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, hand hovering over the seamless stone. The voice, so calm, so certain, spoke again. "Unthreaded element, identify." Ysella went still. Rhovan felt the ward's attention sharpen like a blade. He had told her to lie. If he asks, lie. Ysella's throat bobbed. Then, in a voice steadier than her fear, she said, "No one." The ward paused, an infinitesimal hesitation, like a breath caught. Then the air slammed outward. Ysella staggered back, as if struck by invisible force, and Rhovan caught her, pulling her close enough to keep her upright. The contact was sudden, unavoidable. Ysella's breath hit his chest, fast and hot. Her fingers clenched in his coat. Rhovan held her for a heartbeat too long, because the ward pressure had made the world feel unstable, and her warmth was the only true thing in it. The voice softened, almost kindly. "Deception detected." Rhovan's stomach dropped. The corridor behind them rippled, and Rhovan saw, impossible but clear, an image of the aqueduct door, the bell tower rings, the archive's hidden chamber, all layered over one another like reflections in shattered glass. The loop was showing them its reach. Then the seamless door shimmered and began to open, not with hinges but with the stone itself peeling apart like thick cloth. Cold air poured out, so cold it tasted like iron. Beyond the opening, a stairwell descended into a vast darkness pulsing with faint, rhythmic light. The nocturne heart. Rhovan's throat tightened. "We go," he said, voice rough. Ysella nodded, lips pressed tight, eyes bright with fear and determination. They stepped through. The space beyond was not a simple chamber. It was a cathedral carved from stone, tall arches, star-iron ribs, and at its center a structure that made Rhovan's mind balk. The nocturne heart was not a machine in any familiar sense. It was a suspended lattice of star-iron rings and spellstone plates, layered into a spiraling coil that hung above a black pool. Threads of light ran through it, pale, shimmering filaments that moved like living sinew, looping and looping, feeding back into themselves. It hummed. Not a sound, but a vibration that lived in Rhovan's bones. Ysella stared, awe and horror mixing on her face. "It's beautiful," she whispered, voice breaking. "And it's wrong." Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold enough to ache. "It's the knot," he said. "The fold." The reason the bell resets. As they approached, the filaments shifted, responding to their presence. Rhovan felt the loop's attention like a massive eye turning. Then a figure stepped from the shadows on the far side of the pool. She moved slowly, as if time bent around her more gently. Her hair was pale, braided close to her scalp, and her cloak was black with a faint silver thread lining that caught the heart's pulsing light. Her face was lined with age, but her eyes were sharp as cut glass. Matron Olis Vesper. Rovan's chest tightened, not with surprise. He'd expected the Vespers to guard this place, but with the old, bitter recognition of someone who had once spoken to her with trust. Olis looked at him as if he were exactly where she had placed him. "Rhovan," she said, voice calm. "You always return to the center." Rovan's jaw clenched. "Because you tied me to it." Olis's gaze slid to Ysella, and her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "And you have brought an outsider," she observed. "A thread not of Evernight." Ysella's chin lifted. "You're the one who trapped a whole city in a stolen day," she said, voice trembling but firm. "Don't speak to me like I'm the problem." Olis regarded her quietly. "Spirited," she murmured. "That will make this painful." Rhovan stepped slightly in front of Ysella, not blocking her, but placing himself where any attack would strike him first. "What do you want?" he demanded. Olis's mouth curved into something that might have been pity if pity could ever be so controlled. "Order," she said simply. "The same thing I have always wanted. The same thing you once begged me to preserve." Rovan's throat tightened. "I begged you to save lives." "And I did," Olis said, voice still calm. She gestured toward the heart, the spiral coil of light. "Do you feel it? The dawnfall is not a story. It is a surge of celestial ether that would complete if time were allowed to move. Evernight sits on the fault line of that old catastrophe. If the day uncoils too quickly, the fire returns." Ysella's eyes flashed. "So your solution was to steal everyone's future." Olis's gaze didn't waver. "My solution was to keep them alive," she corrected. "A future is meaningless if you are ash." Rhovan felt his wrist mark pulse, echoing the words Ysella had stored from the cylinder. "If dawn completes, the city burns." The truth wasn't simple. It never was. But neither was Olis innocent. "You've been draining them," Ysella said, voice tight. "Their memory. Their selves. The loop eats them and you call it mercy." Olis's expression hardened, a small shift that made her seem suddenly more dangerous. "I call it necessity," she said. "You are young enough to think ethics survive catastrophe. I am old enough to know survival is the first ethics." Rovan's jaw clenched. "And what am I?" he demanded. "A necessity too?" Olis looked at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "You were willing." Rhovan flinched as if struck. The words landed in the place where his oldest guilt lived. Ysella's hand caught his sleeve, gentle but firm, as if refusing to let him fall into that guilt alone. Rhovan breathed in once, steadying. "Willing is not the same as informed," he said harshly. "You didn't tell me what it would become." Olis's gaze slid to his wrist mark. "I told you what mattered," she said. "That the city would burn if dawn completed. That we needed an anchor. That you were strong enough to bear remembrance. And you made me bear it alone," Rhovan said. Olis's eyes flickered, brief, almost human. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Because if too many remembered, the loop would fracture. People would panic. They would tear at the seams without understanding the cost." Ysella's voice rose, sharp. "So you kept them asleep." Olis turned her attention fully to Ysella. "And now you have awakened," she said, almost thoughtfully. "Tell me, outsider, what do you want? To go home? Or to play hero and burn us all?" Ysella's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, fear flashed in her eyes, the fear of being responsible for catastrophe. Rhovan felt it too, because he'd carried that fear for years. It had driven him into patience and restraint until patience became paralysis. Ysella swallowed hard. "I want a tomorrow," she said, voice steadying. "For them. For you. For him." She looked at Rhovan when she said him, and the word was simple but it warmed the air between them like a small flame. Olis's gaze sharpened. "For him," she repeated softly. How quickly attachment forms in the dark. Ysella's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. Not quickly, she said, and there was quiet truth in it. Repeatedly. Rhovan's throat tightened. Ollis's expression turned colder. Then you have made yourself his weakness. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold. He felt the heart's filaments shift, responding, as if the loop itself had heard Ollis's observation and approved. He stepped forward, voice low and fierce. Don't, he warned. Ollis raised one hand, and the filaments of the nocturne heart surged. The air snapped like a whip. Ysella gasped as invisible force yanked at her, not her body alone, but something deeper, like the seam of her presence in Evernight. She staggered, feet skidding on stone, and Rhovan lunged to catch her. His arms wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close, bracing her against him. Ysella clutched his coat, fingers digging in, breath ragged. Rhovan felt the heart's pressure tugging at her like a riptide. She doesn't belong, Ollis said calmly. The heart will reject her. It will tear her out of the weave and close the rift behind her. Your anomaly will be resolved. Ysella's voice broke. Rhovan. Rovan's jaw clenched. Panic clawed at him, but he forced it down. Panic was what the loop wanted. He pressed his forehead briefly to Ysella's hood, an instinctive gesture, grounding, intimate without being indulgent. Breathe, he murmured. Look at me. Breathe. Ysella's eyes found his, wide and terrified. She forced a breath in. The heart tugged harder. Rovan's wrist mark seared cold. He felt the anchor binding flare, as if trying to pull him into alignment with the heart's will. Correct the anomaly. Remove the outsider. He snarled softly, more animal than man, and reached into threadsense. Not into the heart. That would be suicide. Into the binding on his own wrist. He found the inkband's threads, tight, painful, braided into his memory pathways like barbed wire. He seized them with his will and twisted, just enough to redirect. Pain exploded behind his eyes, white-hot and freezing at once. His stomach lurched. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. But the heart's tug on Ysella eased, fractionally. Enough. Ysella sucked in air, sobbing once, then biting it back. Ollis's eyes narrowed. You would harm yourself, she murmured, almost disappointed. Still sentimental. Rovan's voice came out rough. Still human, he snarled. The pain behind his eyes sharpened, and with it came a sickening emptiness, like a shelf in his mind suddenly cleared. He blinked hard, disoriented. A memory slipped away, clean as a thread cut. He tried to grasp it, something small, something warm, but it was gone. Ysella noticed instantly. Her eyes widened, horror joining fear. It took something, she whispered. Rhovan swallowed. I can still stand, he said, voice tight. That's what matters. Ollis lifted her hand again. The heart's filaments surged once more aggressive, wrapping the air in invisible coils. Ysella's body jerked forward as if grabbed by a giant hand. Rhovan tightened his hold, planting his feet, hauling her back. Stone scraped under his boots. His wrist mark flared, burning cold, and the pain behind his eyes became a knife. He could not do this indefinitely. He looked at the heart, at the spiral coil, at the pulsing filaments. He felt the loop's rhythm, the bell cadence hidden inside the machine's hum. A thought sparked, sharp and dangerous. If he could alter the rhythm, if he could detune the heart's fold, he might weaken its grip long enough for Ysella to do what she did, it seems. But touching the heart directly would cost memory. Maybe all memory. And yet. Ysella's fingers tightened on his coat, desperate. Don't let it throw me out, she whispered. Rovan's throat tightened so hard it hurt. He met her gaze. In her eyes he saw fear, yes. But also trust. Clean, fierce trust that he didn't deserve and didn't have time to refuse. He made his decision. Ysella, he said, voice low and urgent. Listen carefully. If I tell you to run, you run. Her brows knit, understanding flickering. No, she whispered immediately. Yes, he said, and there was no room for argument. You are the outside thread. If you're expelled, the loop wins. If I'm damaged, it hurts, but I can reset around it. You can't. Ysella's eyes filled. Rhovan. Look at me, he snapped softly. She did. I choose you, he said, the words raw and quiet, not a declaration for romance, but a truth of strategy and heart braided together. Do you understand? Ysella's breath caught, and her lips trembled. She nodded once, fierce and shaken. Rhovan released her just enough to step forward, then turned toward the nocturne heart. Olissa's eyes narrowed. Don't, she said, and for the first time her calm cracked into something like warning. You don't know what you're doing. Rhovan laughed once, bitter. Neither did you. He reached into threadsense and touched the heart's outermost filament. The world screamed. Not with sound, but with sensation. His nerves lit up. His wrist mark blazed cold. The filaments of the heart surged like living wire, and Rhovan felt the loop's entire weight slam into him, trying to force him back into obedience. He held. He found the rhythm, 3 pulses, pause, 2 pulses echoing the threshold ward. He twisted the rhythm, just a fraction, detuning the cadence. The heart shuddered. Olissa's eyes widened. Stop, she snapped, her voice no longer calm. Rhovan's vision swam. His skull felt too small for the pressure inside it. He felt memory begin to fray. Images flickered: his room, his kettle, the street boy with the chipped tooth, the sound of Ysella's voice saying his name. The sound slipped. He tried to hold it, but the loop tore at it like a starving thing. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder, detuning the rhythm again. The heart's filaments recoiled. And in that moment of recoil, the invisible pressure on Ysella slackened. Ysella stumbled back, free for a breath. Rhovan shouted, voice raw. Now. Pull the seam. Ysella didn't hesitate. She lunged toward the heart, not to touch it like Rhovan had, but to reach for the edge where throughlight could catch. Her hands lifted, fingers spread, and the air around her warmed with that impossible dawn tinge. She found a seam, something in the heart's weave that wasn't fully closed, a place where the loop folded back into itself. She tugged. The heart convulsed. A shockwave rippled through the chamber, slamming Ysella backward. She hit the stone hard, gasping. Rhovan stumbled, the world tilting. Olis threw out both hands, and her own thread binding flared dark, precise knots snapping into place in the air like invisible chains. Enough, she snapped. The heart's filaments surged violently, and this time they didn't only tug at Ysella. They latched onto Rovan's wrist mark. The anchor binding tightened. Rhovan cried out, pain ripping through him, and he felt his mind yanked toward alignment with the loop's will. Correct. Restore. Repeat. He fought. The filaments pulled harder. His memories began to tear like paper. He saw, suddenly, vividly, his first day in the loop. His first bell. His first realization that the sun wouldn't rise. Then the memory shattered, replaced by emptiness. He forgot the taste of bitterleaf tea entirely. He forgot the warmth of a hearth. He forgot Ysella's voice cut through, panicked and furious. Rhovan. Her name for him anchored something in his chest even as his mind frayed. Rhovan forced his eyes open. Ysella was on her knees, palms pressed to the stone, trying to rise. Her face was pale, eyes bright with fear. And behind her, the air shimmered. A rift. Not the stable tear that had brought her through, but a jagged wound opening like an emergency exit Evernights weave trying to expel the outsider thread. Ysella saw it too. Her breath hitched. No, she whispered. The rift widened, light spilling out, warm, true, sun-tinted. It tugged at her. Her cloak fluttered toward it as if pulled by wind. Rovan's stomach dropped. Ysella, he rasped, trying to move, but the heart's filaments held him like a leash, pain locking his limbs. Olissa's expression was cold again, controlled. There, she said softly. Order. Ysella's hands shook. She looked at the rift, then at Rhovan. Choice carved itself into her face. She crawled toward him instead of toward the rift. Rovan's throat tightened so hard he could barely breathe. Don't, he tried to say, but the word came out broken. Ysella reached him, grabbed his coat, and pressed her forehead against his chest for one fierce heartbeat, as if imprinting him into memory the way she imprinted shards. I won't leave you, she whispered. Rhovan felt something inside him crack, not hope, not despair, but a fierce, aching tenderness so sharp it hurt. He wanted to tell her she had to. That love did not require ruin. But time was thin and the heart was hungry. The rift tugged harder. Ysella's body jerked as if caught by a current. She clutched Rhovan's coat with both hands, knuckles white. Store it. Rhovan rasped, forcing the words through pain. Store what matters. Now. Ysella's eyes widened, understanding. Her hand fumbled into her pocket, pulling out a blank glassen shard. Her fingers trembled so violently she nearly dropped it. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold as the heart pulled, trying to force him to stop her. His mind blurred, edges fraying. Ysella pressed the shard to her tongue and squeezed her eyes shut. Rhovan Sairn, she whispered around it, voice shaking. Nocturne heart. Dawnfall. Anchor binding. The rift yanked. Ysella screamed a short, startled sound and her body slid across the stone, dragged toward the light. Rhovan fought the filaments with everything he had left. He twisted the anchor binding again, tearing at his own leash, and pain exploded behind his eyes. He felt another memory rip away. He forgot the sound of his own laughter. He didn't know he'd ever laughed. But his hand moved. He seized Ysella's wrist just as the rift's pull lifted her shoulders from the stone. Their fingers locked. Ysella's eyes were wild with terror, but she held his gaze. Rhovan's voice came out hoarse. Listen, he said, forcing clarity through the tearing fog. If you go, come back. Same way. Same 12th hour. Say my name. Do you understand? Ysella's lips trembled. Yes, she gasped. Yes. The heart's filaments surged one last time, tightening around Rhovan's wrist mark like a vice. His grip slipped. Ysella's fingers clawed at his. For an instant, their hands were linked only by fingertips. Rhovan felt the loop's hunger. Then the rift tore Ysella away. Light swallowed her. The rift snapped shut with a sound like a door slamming. Silence crashed into the chamber. Rhovan fell to one knee, gasping, the filaments finally loosening as if satisfied. His skull throbbed, a hollow ache behind his eyes where memories had been. He blinked hard, trying to steady himself. Olis stood across the pool, breathing evenly, as if she'd merely corrected a misaligned tapestry. There, she said softly. The city will hold. Rhovan stared at the empty space where Ysella had been, the stone scraped where she'd been dragged. His chest ached, not with physical pain but with something worse, the abrupt absence of her warmth beside him. He tried to recall her face fully, her gold-flecked eyes, her stubborn mouth. The memory wavered, edges fraying, as if the loop were already trying to dull it. Panic clawed at him. No. He would not let it. He forced himself to focus on what remained clear, her name. Ysella Vey. The promise she'd whispered, I won't leave you, and the way she'd moved toward him instead of toward the rift. His throat tightened. Olis's voice softened again, almost gentle. You did this to yourself, she said. You always do. You reach, and the loop bites, and you call it cruelty instead of consequence. Rhovan's voice came out low and broken. You used consequence as a weapon, he snarled. You call it mercy because you're afraid to admit you're afraid. Olis's eyes flashed. Afraid, she repeated, the word sharp. Rhovan pushed himself upright, trembling. Afraid that if you let time move, you'll have to face what you've done, he said, voice gaining strength through anger and grief. Afraid that you might be wrong. Afraid that the city could survive without your hand on its throat. Olis's composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, and something fierce and wounded showed through. You think I did this for power, she hissed. You think I wanted to become the villain in your small romance. Rhovan flinched at the word romance, not because it was wrong, but because it was true enough to hurt. Olis lifted her chin, eyes bright with controlled fury. I watched the sky burn once, she said, voice trembling with remembered fire. I watched children turn to ash in their mother's arms. I watched the world become daylight so hot it screamed. You were not there, Rhovan. You did not smell it. You did not feel the heat on your skin. Rhovan's breath hitched. He had no memory of it. Only the loop's warnings and Olis's fear. Olis gestured toward the heart. This is what stands between Evernight and annihilation, she said. And you would tear it apart for a stranger who fell through a crack. Rhovan's voice went quiet, deadly. Not for her, he said. With her. And for everyone you've kept asleep. Olis's eyes narrowed. She is gone. Rhovan's stomach clenched, but he forced his voice steady. No, he said. She'll come back. Olis laughed softly, a sound like a blade drawn slowly. You still believe in return, she murmured. Even after all your years. Rhovan's wrist mark pulsed coldly as if mocking him. He swayed, dizzy, and had to brace himself on the stone lip of the pool. The heart's hum pressed against him, reminding him how small he was beneath its mechanism. He needed to leave. He needed to get out before the loop corrected further, before Olis decided to bind him tighter, erase his remaining agency, seal the seam forever. He forced his legs to move. Olis didn't stop him. She watched as if she knew he couldn't truly escape. As Rhovan backed toward the stairwell, Olis spoke once more, her voice returning to calm. When 13th midnight tolls, she said, you will reset. You will wake and remember your outsider, if you remember her at all. But she will not return. The heart will not allow it. Rhovan swallowed hard. You're wrong. Olis's gaze was sharp. Am I? She asked softly. Or are you simply desperate to be saved? The words struck where his pride and pain intertwined. Rhovan turned away before she could see the answer in his face. He fled the nocturne cathedral, climbing the stairs with shaking legs, following the maze by instinct and thread sense. The corridors seemed to warp subtly behind him, as if the loop tried to guide him into a pocket, to slow him, to keep him within reach. He fought it, using the ward pulses he'd observed, moving on the third flicker, pausing on the second, slipping between the loop's breaths. By the time he reached the iron gate Varric had opened, his coat was damp with sweat, his wrist mark aching, his skull buzzing with hollowness. Varric wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. He was smart enough not to linger. Rhovan stumbled up into the dock quarters night air just as the 12th hour deepened. The aurora above was flaring, violet blooming into blue, the sky bruising itself into beauty. Evernight's streets continued as if nothing had happened. Rhovan moved through them like a man half-drowned. He didn't go to his rooms first. His feet carried him, by instinct older than logic, to Myra Quenfold's rooftop garden. Myra knelt among her lilies, hands in soil that never stayed worked. She looked up when he approached, eyes soft and steady. Rhovan's throat tightened. Myra, he said, voice rough. Myra blinked, then lifted a hand to her mouth as if surprised by her own sudden emotion. She began, then stopped. Her gaze sharpened, as if she were reaching for something just beyond recall. Rhovan's heart lurched. Myra's lips parted. Light, she whispered. Rhovan went still. Myra's fingers trembled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a glassen shard, cracked now, edges clouded with overuse. She stared at it as if it were a miracle. Rhovan's chest tightened painfully. He had given it to her. In a previous loop. Or the loop's endless repeats. Myra looked at him, eyes bright. You told me to keep it under my tongue, she said, voice shaking. I don't remember why, but she swallowed. I remember, light. Rhovan's throat closed. Not because it solved anything, but because it proved that even in Evernight's cruelty, something could be carried forward by stubborn hands. He stepped closer, voice low. Did you see her? He asked, though he knew the answer. Myra frowned, searching. A woman, she whispered. She fell. She said your name. Her eyes widened, startled. She said your name. Rhovan's knees nearly buckled. He forced himself to breathe. Yes, he whispered. She did. Myra's gaze softened with a quiet grief that felt too wise for a gardener. Then you'll find her again, she said gently, as if offering him a truth the loop could not erase. Rhovan wanted to believe her. He didn't have time to indulge belief. He left Myra's garden and returned to his rooms, moving fast now despite his shaking limbs. Inside, he tore through his leather case, pulling out the remaining blank shards ELD had given them. He set them on the table in a neat line, hands trembling. He wrote on cloth with charcoal, large and blunt, Ysella expelled by rift at heart. Olis Vesper confirms dawnfall risk. Heart rejects outsider thread. Need reweave, not break. He stared at the words until they blurred. His skull throbbed. He could feel holes in his mind, places where memories should have been and weren't. He tried to recall what he had said to Ysella right before she was torn away. I choose you. The phrase surfaced. Relief washed through him. Then the relief curdled because he couldn't clearly remember the tone. The look on her face. The exact warmth of her hand on his coat. He slammed his fist lightly against the table, anger sharp and pointless. No. He would not let the loop make her into a fading impression. He took a glassen shard and pressed it to his tongue, forcing his mind into precision. One sentence. Clean. Functional. No emotion. He sealed the words into crystal with shaking will. Ysella will return at 12th if rift reopened, call her back. Reweave heart into slow dawn release. When he lowered the shard, it shimmered faintly intact, but the effort made his vision swim. 13th Midnight was near. The air thickened. The kettle water trembled. The lamplight outside flickered as the city braced to be taken back. Rhovan sat at the table, both hands flat on the wood, breathing through the ache in his skull and the cold burn on his wrist. He stared at the line of shards and cloth, as if staring hard enough could force time to behave. In the last moments before the reset, he whispered, too quiet for the loop to hear, he hoped, and too sincere to be safe. Come back, he said into the dim room, as if the air itself might carry the plea across worlds. Please. The final bell struck. The world snapped. The first toll of the gloam bell thundered through Evernight again. Rhovan gasped awake at his window, hand against glass, as if he had never moved. Below, lamplighters tapped lanterns. The bun seller crossed the street. The boy ran after her. Rhovan turned sharply from the window, chest heaving. His table. Coin. Paper. Glass in shards. They were there because he had hidden them well enough, because he had prepared, because he had learned the only progress Evernight permitted was the kind you smuggled through its teeth. He snatched the shard he'd sealed, pressed it to his tongue, and let the stored sentence bloom in his mind. Ysella will return at 12th if rift reopened, call her back. Reweave heart into slow dawn release. Relief and panic tangled in his chest. He forced himself upright, grabbed his coat, and ran for the rooftops. By the 11th hour, he was on Myra's garden roof again, eyes fixed on the sky as the aurora began to flare. Violet deepened. Blue bled into it. The air shivered. A rift split open above the lilies, spilling warm light like a promise. And this time, as the rift widened, something didn't fall through. Something reached. A hand appeared first, fingers splayed, grasping for the rooftop edge as if clawing its way back into Evernight. Then an arm, trembling with effort. Rhovan's breath caught painfully. Ysella, he shouted, voice breaking. Her face appeared, pale, strained, eyes fierce with remembered determination. She hauled herself through as if the rift were resisting her every inch. Rhovan ran. He dropped into the garden just as Ysella's knees hit the stone path. She gasped, shaking, and looked up at him with eyes that were not confused, not lost, but blazing with purpose. I'm here, she rasped. And you were right. Rhovan crouched in front of her, hands hovering as if afraid to touch her in case the loop punished them both. You came back, he breathed. Ysella nodded hard, teeth clenched against shaking. But it tried to keep me, she whispered. It will try again. Rhovan. Her gaze locked on his wrist mark, and fear flickered. Then she looked up at him, and her voice steadied into something fierce and clean. We don't break it, she said. We change what it's doing. Rhovan's throat tightened. Tell me what you saw on the other side, he whispered. Ysella swallowed. Not my world, she said. Not sunlight. Just edges. Threads. The loop trying to spit me out like I was poison. She gripped his sleeve, grounding herself. I felt the seam you touched inside the heart. It's there. It can be rethreaded. But we need one thing. Rhovan's pulse spiked. What? Ysella's eyes flashed with terror and resolve. We need you to stop being its leash, she whispered. Even for a moment. Rhovan went still, the cold band on his wrist pulsing like a warning. Above them, the rift flickered, unstable. Time, real time, ran thin. And somewhere deep beneath the city, the nocturne heart hummed, waking to the fact that its outsider thread had returned. Rhovan stared at the pale band on his wrist as if it were a living thing. It pulsed in time with the distant bells, cold against his skin, a reminder that the loop wasn't only around the city, it was threaded through him. Ysella knelt on the garden path, still catching her breath, one hand gripping his sleeve like she could anchor herself by touch alone. The rift above the lilies flickered, unstable, shedding warm light that made Evernight's dusk look like a lie. "We need you to stop being its leash," she had said. "Even for a moment." Rovan's throat tightened. "If I loosen it," he whispered, "the loop could snap." "It could. Or it could finally move," Ysella cut in, voice hoarse but steady. She pushed herself upright, swaying. Olis said dawn completing all at once would burn the city. She's terrified of uncoiling. But we don't have to uncoil it all at once. Rovan's mind raced, clinging to the one word that mattered. Gradual. Yes, Ysella said fiercely. A slow dawn release. Like easing a knot instead of cutting a rope. He remembered the heart's rhythm, the way wards breathed in bell cadence. 3 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. He remembered how the tuning rings responded, how the heart recoiled when detuned, how it tried to throw Ysella out like an infection. And he remembered the founding memory Ysella had seen, bind the day, anchor required. The anchor isn't just memory, Rhovan murmured. It's an alignment. A command. It makes me cooperate with correction. Ysella's gaze didn't waver. Then we give it a new command, she said. Not repeat. Not remove the outsider. We tell it, release, slowly. A cold shiver ran down Rhovan's spine. That's not a command you can whisper into a shard, he said. That's a command you have to weave into the heart itself. Ysella nodded. Then we weave it. The rift above them shuddered, light thinning. They didn't have much time before it sealed. Rhovan made his choice without letting himself hesitate long enough to feel fear. Come, he said, and offered his hand open, steady, an invitation rather than a grip. Ysella took it immediately. Her fingers were cold from the rift's air. Rovan's palm warmed around them, and the contact landed in him like a vow he hadn't spoken aloud. They moved, fast, silent, over rooftops and down stairwells, toward the one place in Evernight where memory could be turned into method. The glass archive. Eld Brennikar was at his desk when they arrived, sorting shards with hands that looked calm until you noticed the tension in his knuckles. His eyes snapped up the moment they entered, and for the smallest moment his careful composure cracked. She returned, he breathed. Ysella didn't waste breath on greetings. She crossed to the desk, pulled out the shard that held the founding memory phrases, and placed it down like a weapon. You said there are thin places, she said. And you hid the chamber. We need more than shards now. We need the oath. Eld's gaze sharpened. The founding oaths, he murmured, glancing toward the back aisles as if the shelves themselves might be listening. Why? Because the anchor mark is made of that oath, Rhovan said, voice tight. It's the binding language. If we can find the counterclause, if there is one, then we can loosen the leash long enough for her to retune the heart. Eld's mouth tightened with something like grief. There is always a counterclause, he said quietly. No weave holds without one. But it was hidden for a reason. Ysella leaned in, eyes bright. Because if people knew they could loosen it, they'd try, she said. And the Vespers couldn't risk losing control. Eld's fingers hovered over the desk edge. And if you loosen it wrong, he warned, you could trigger the dawnfall. Rhovan swallowed. We don't loosen it wrong, he said, then forced himself to add, we loosen it slowly. Eld stared at them for a long beat, weighing fear against hope. Then he reached under his desk and drew out a crystal cylinder, smaller than the one in the hidden chamber, but similar in shape. He set it down carefully, like something that could crack the world. This is a copy of the founding clause, he said. I made it long ago, when I realized the archive wasn't simply preserving memory, it was hiding leverage. His gaze flicked to Rovan's wrist. You didn't ask before. I didn't want to know, Rhovan admitted, voice rough. Not if knowing meant I'd try and fail and lose even the memory of trying. Ysella's hand slid to Rhovan's sleeve, light, steady. You won't do this alone, she said. ELD closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself, then placed his fingertips on the cylinder. The clause is not kind, he said. It was written by people who believed they were saving the world, and it reads like a prayer with teeth. He looked at Ysella. You'll need to store it, he said. If you forget one word at the wrong moment, the heart will interpret you as an attack. Ysella nodded once. I can store it. ELD's gaze slid to the door. And you'll need distractions, he added softly. Because Calethorn will be waiting the moment you move toward the nocturne lanes again. Rhovan's jaw tightened. Then we don't walk in quietly. Ysella's eyes flashed. We make them look elsewhere. Rhovan thought of slate eyes and an honest spine. A man whose mind snagged on reality like it wanted to wake. Captain Sairn, he said. ELD hesitated, then nodded. Resistant, he murmured. Not immune. But resistant. Then we use that resistance, Rhovan said. Not by lying to him. By giving him a role that fits what he already is. Ysella tilted her head. A protector. Rhovan's throat tightened. Yes. The 10th hour bell tolled in the distance. Time narrowed. Rhovan left Ysella in the archive alcove with ELD for 7 precious minutes, long enough for her to press the claws into glassine with careful precision, long enough for ELD to demonstrate the seal's structure, long enough for Ysella's brow to furrow with the strain of holding words too heavy for crystal. When Rhovan returned, Ysella's eyes were bright and steady. She held up a shard. I have it, she said. ELD looked paler than before, as if the act of handing them leverage had cost him something. It begins with the warning, he murmured. Remember that. They wrote it because they feared what you are about to do. Ysella nodded. What's the warning? ELD's voice dropped. That dawn is not gentle, he said. That if you pull too fast, it burns. Rhovan's chest tightened. Then we don't pull, he said. Ysella exhaled. We retune. They met Captain Sairn at Greysward Lane where he always stood at this hour, adjusting his gauntlet strap with that same small, habitual motion. He looked up as they approached, and something in his gaze sharpened, not recognition exactly, but awareness like a sleeper hearing his name. Master Sairn, he said automatically. Rhovan stepped close enough that Sairn could hear without the street hearing. He lowered his hood just enough for Sairn to see his eyes. Captain, Rhovan said. There will be an incident at the Vesper District Gate in the 12th hour. Sairn's brows knit. An incident? Yes, Rhovan said. He didn't lie. House Vesper will be looking in the wrong place. I need your watch to be there first. Sairn's gaze flicked to Ysella, hooded, quiet, standing with her shoulders squared. Who is she? Ysella lifted her chin. Someone who doesn't want your city to keep dying the same way, she said. Sairn stared at her for a long beat. Then he looked back at Rhovan. Why should I trust you? He asked quietly. Rhovan didn't flinch. You shouldn't, he said. But you do. Every day, you feel it. That something is wrong. That you're walking through a dream someone else is having. Sairn's face went still, the muscles in his jaw tightening. I said that once, he murmured, voice strained, as if hearing his own words echo from somewhere deep inside him. Rhovan nodded once. Then listen now, he said, voice low. Protect the gate. Keep Calethorn busy. Don't let him follow the undercity routes. Sairn swallowed. He looked from Rhovan to Ysella and back, and his eyes hardened not with anger, but with purpose. All right, he said. I'll keep him busy. Ysella's shoulders eased a fraction. Thank you, she whispered. Sairn's gaze lingered on her a heartbeat too long, then snapped away as if he didn't know why he wanted to remember her face. Go, he said roughly. Whatever you're doing, do it fast. They didn't have to find Varric. He found them appearing out of the crowd near the docks like he'd been following rumors on purpose. You're insane, he hissed, eyes wide. The Vesper Watch is swarming the clean streets. Calethorn's there, smiling like he's already won. Good, Rhovan said, and the word surprised even him. Varric stared. That's your plan? Make him feel good. Our plan is to make him feel occupied, Ysella snapped. Take us down. Varric swore softly, then jerked his chin. Fine. But if you die, don't haunt my pockets. They descended again. The nocturne lanes greeted them with colder air, tighter wards, and a hum that felt more awake than before. The heart had noticed Ysella's return. It had been waiting. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold as if anticipating punishment. Ysella walked beside him, hand brushing his sleeve sometimes, not clinging, but checking, grounding. Every time her fingers touched fabric, Rhovan's chest tightened with a strange steadiness. They reached the threshold ward with the black pool and the hovering ring. This time, they didn't try to slip. Rhovan watched the ward's pulse. 1, 2, 3. He murmured, now, and they stepped forward, controlled, calm. The ward's attention swept over them, colder and sharper than before. It tried to push Ysella sideways, to throw her out of alignment. Ysella adjusted her breathing, steadying. She didn't fight the push directly. She moved with it like a dancer shifting weight, then took one precise step at the third flicker when the ward's grip loosened. They passed. Rhovan exhaled once, shaky. You're learning the city's breath, he murmured. Ysella's eyes flicked to him. I'm learning yours, she whispered back, and then she looked away quickly as if the words were too intimate to safely exist in a place that ate intimacy. They reached the seamless anchor seal door. It shimmered at their approach. The voice slid into Rhovan's skull like silk over steel. Rhovan Sairn. Correction required. Rhovan's jaw clenched. He didn't answer aloud. Ysella stepped forward instead, voice quiet and steady. We're not correcting, she said. We're rethreading. The door's surface rippled. The pale ink band embedded in stone warmed, recognizing the language of clause and command. Rhovan's wrist mark pulsed in response, as if trying to align him with the door's will. He forced his breathing slow and focused on Ysella's presence beside him, on the warmth that wasn't Evernight's false heat, on the gaze he could feel even when she wasn't looking at him. Unthreaded element detected, the voice said. Removal authorized. The door began to open. Cold air spilled out. Rhovan didn't let himself hesitate this time. They stepped through into the nocturne cathedral. The heart hung above the black pool, its filaments pulsing with restless force. The moment Ysella entered, the filaments stirred like nerves recognizing a splinter. And matron Olis Vesper waited across the pool as if she'd never moved. Calethorn was there too, standing a step behind her, his smile polished and cold. His gaze fixed on Ysella like she was a specimen he intended to pin. You returned, Olis said calmly. Ysella's chin lifted. Yes, she said. Because you were wrong about one thing. Olis's eyes narrowed. Only one? Ysella's voice held steady. You think control is the same as survival. Olis's mouth tightened. And you think hope is the same as wisdom. Rhovan stepped forward, voice low. We're not breaking the loop, he said. We're changing what it does. Calethorn laughed softly. A lovely sentiment, he murmured. Do you think the heart cares about sentiment? Rhovan's eyes flashed. No, he said. It cares about rhythm. Olis stilled. Rhythm, she repeated, wary. Ysella pulled a glassen shard from her pocket, the one holding the founding clause. She held it up, not as a threat, but as proof. Olis's gaze sharpened, and for the first time she looked something close to alarmed. Where did you get that? The place you hid it, Ysella said. The place you didn't want even your own city to know existed. Calethorn's smile vanished. His hand shifted at his belt as if he wished for a weapon that could cut crystal. Olis's voice went colder. You don't understand what you hold. I understand enough, Ysella said. I saw what you did to him. I saw the promise you made and the cage you built. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold, as if protesting being spoken of as a person rather than a tool. Olis's gaze flicked to his wrist. Something sharp and wounded crossed her face. You were willing, she said again, softer, as if it could still justify her. Rhovan's voice cracked, just slightly. I was good, he said quietly. I wanted to help. And you used that goodness to make a lock. Silence tightened between them. Then Olis's eyes hardened. And now you would make that lock fail, she said. You would invite dawn. Rhovan's voice steadied. Not a sudden dawn, he said. A slow one. Ysella stepped to the edge of the pool, eyes fixed on the heart. You feared the dawnfall surge, she said to Olis without looking at her. So you folded time to stop it. But you didn't solve the surge. You only delayed it and fed on the city to keep the fold stable. Olis's jaw tightened. Fed, she repeated, insulted. Ysella's eyes flashed. Don't pretend the forgetting is an accident. Calethorn's voice was silky. Enough, he murmured. We should remove her now. The heart's filaments surged at his cue, tugging at Ysella like an undertow. Ysella's breath hitched, and Rhovan moved automatically, hand at her elbow, steadying. But Ysella didn't cling this time. She looked at Rhovan, eyes fierce. Now, she whispered. Rovan's pulse hammered. He knew what she meant. He lifted his wrist, exposing the pale ink band to the heart's pulsing light. The anchor mark flared cold. Rhovan closed his eyes and reached into the binding with his will. He didn't try to tear it. Tearing was what the loop punished. Tearing invited fire. He loosened, carefully, like easing a knot. Pain blossomed behind his eyes, but he held it, breathing through it, refusing panic. He felt the binding's command shift from a clenched fist to a tightened hand. Not free. But not fully closed. Ysella pressed the founding claws shard to her tongue and stepped forward, placing her fingertips near the heart's outer seam, not on the central filaments like Rhovan had done, but on the edge where the fold returned into itself. The heart reacted instantly, filaments whipping toward her. Rovan's wrist mark flared cold, and the binding tried to snap back into obedience, remove the outsider. Rhovan snarled softly and held the loosened knot in place. Ysella whispered through the shard, voice shaking with strain but precise with structure. Bind the day until the fire is spent, release the dawn by measured breath, 3 pulses, pause, 2. As she spoke, the heart's rhythm wavered. The filaments trembled, uncertain. It wasn't used to being given a new instruction from an outside thread. Olis's eyes widened. Stop, she hissed, stepping forward, both hands lifting as her own thread binding flared dark, precise knots snapping into place in the air like nets. Calethorn moved too, circling, trying to flank Ysella. But the day's script cracked. Captain Sorin's shout echoed from somewhere above, carried down the stairwell like thunder. In the name of the watch, stand down. A second voice, sharp, angry, answered, Calethorn's. You have no authority here, Captain. The distraction worked. It pulled Calethorn's attention outward for a heartbeat long enough. Ysella took it. She didn't tug hard. She didn't force. She retuned. She pressed her through light into the seam in small, measured pulses that matched the claws. 3, pause, 2, like breathing life into a rhythm that had forgotten it could change. The heart shuddered. Its filaments recoiled, then settled into the new cadence, resisting, then reluctantly aligning. Rhovan felt the loop react like a living thing caught off balance. The air tightened. The bells in the city seemed to hold their breath. Olis's face went pale. You don't know what you're doing, she whispered, and for the first time fear, not control, shaped her voice. If you release it wrong. Ysella's eyes flicked to her, fierce and steady. Then help us, she said. Olis froze. The words hit like a blade turned toward mercy. Rhovan's chest tightened. He had expected a battle, not an invitation. Olis's hands trembled, just slightly, as her thread binding hovered in the air, half-cast. You think I can simply change it, she whispered. After all this time? Yes, Ysella said. Because you still care whether the city burns. Olis's eyes flashed with grief and fury. You don't know what it cost. Rhovan's voice went rough. I do, he said quietly. I've lived it every day. Olis looked at him, truly looked, for a long, unbearable moment. Then her gaze dropped to his wrist mark, and something in her expression broke. Rhovan, she breathed, as if saying his name differently for the first time in years. If I loosen this, if I take my hand off. The city might finally live, Rhovan said, voice tight. And you might finally stop holding it alone. Olis's eyes filled not with tears, but with that bright sheen of emotion forced into restraint. She swallowed hard. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand not on the heart, but on the air beside it, where the weave's older stitches lay. Her thread binding flared, not as a net, but as a brace. She matched Ysella's cadence. 3 pulses. Pause. 2. The heart's filaments trembled and then, astonishingly, began to settle. The hum in the cathedral changed, deepening into something steadier, less frantic. The black pool beneath the heart rippled for the first time, as if time itself had shivered awake. Rhovan's wrist mark burned cold, then warmed, then cooled again, as if the binding were being rewritten rather than fought. Calethorn burst into the cathedral then, cloak disheveled, eyes hard with rage. Behind him, Captain Sairn appeared at the stairwell entrance, sword drawn but held low, breathing hard. Calethorn saw Ollis's hand in the weave and went white with shock. "Matron, what are you doing?" Ollis didn't look at him. Her voice was tight with effort. "Saving the city," she said. "This time without chains." Calethorn's face twisted. "You can't," he hissed, stepping forward as if to yank her away. Sairn moved instantly, barring the path. "Stay back," he snapped. Calethorn's gaze flicked to Sairn, contemptuous. "You don't even know what you're defending." Sorin's jaw clenched. "I know what I'm defending," he said, voice rough. "A chance to wake up." Calethorn snarled and raised his hands, wardlight gathering. Rhovan's instincts surged: protect, correct, contain. The anchor mark tried to tighten again, sensing threat. Rhovan forced it down, holding the loosened knot with shaking will. He stepped between Calethorn and Ysella without thinking. Calethorn's eyes narrowed. "Still playing hero," he sneered. "Still sentimental." Rhovan's voice was low and steady. "Still choosing," he said. Ysella didn't look away from the heart. Sweat ran down her temple. Her hands trembled with strain, but her cadence held. 3, pause, 2. Ollis matched it, jaw clenched, face pale. The heart's light brightened, not flaring, not violent, but warming gradually, like embers fanned with care. Calethorn made a sharp motion, casting toward Ysella. Sairn lunged to intercept, and the heart pulsed. A wave of force rolled outward, not a crushing correction like before, but a steady push, like a tide. Calethorn staggered, his spell unraveling midair as if the weave itself refused to carry it. He stared, shocked. Ollis's voice was a strained whisper. "The heart is listening to the new cadence," she said. "It won't accept violence while it's retuning." Ysella's breath came in ragged gasps. "Then keep him back," she rasped. Sairn didn't hesitate. He drove Calethorn away from the pool edge with firm steps, sword still low but unyielding. Calethorn's eyes went wild. "You're all fools," he spat. "If dawn comes, it comes slowly," Ysella whispered, voice trembling with effort. Like breath. The bells above, so familiar, so tyrannical, began to change. Not in pitch, but in timing. The 11th hour cadence that had always marched toward 13th midnight hesitated, as if the city itself had paused to ask what it was doing. Rhovan felt it in his bones, the loop's script faltering. His wrist mark pulsed, then eased. For the first time in years, the cold burn dimmed. Rhovan's breath caught painfully. "Rhovan," Ysella whispered, and though her eyes never left the heart, he felt the word like a hand reaching for him. "Now. Release the leash." He swallowed hard. This was the cliff edge. If he let go too quickly, the knot could snap. If he held too tightly, the heart would never fully accept the new command. He loosened his will again, careful, measured, matching her cadence. 3. Pause. 2. Pain flared behind his eyes, then softened, as if the binding were unwinding rather than tearing. The pale ink band on his wrist warmed. The heart pulsed once, steady, deep, and the entire cathedral seemed to exhale. Above, the city's lamplight flickered, not failing, but shifting. As if it suddenly remembered there were other kinds of light. Ollis's hands trembled violently. "It's moving," she whispered, awe and fear tangled. Ysella's voice was barely audible. "Let it," she breathed. Slowly. The nocturne heart's filaments began to uncoil, not collapsing, not snapping, but easing into a longer spiral that pointed upward rather than inward. The fold of time loosened by degrees. Rhovan felt the loop's grip on his mind release like fingers uncurling. He staggered, catching himself on the stone lip of the pool. For a heartbeat, he panicked, not because he was afraid of pain, but because he was afraid of forgetting who he was without the loop's constant presence. Then Ysella's hand found his, firm, steady. "I'm here," she whispered, and the simplicity of it anchored him better than any ink band ever had. Rhovan's throat tightened. He squeezed her hand once, careful, a promise without words. The final bell of 13th Midnight did not strike. Instead, something else happened. A hush fell over Evernight, like a blanket laid gently over a restless child. And then, far above, beyond stone and smoke and the nightwreath's bruised colors, a pale line appeared on the eastern horizon. Not a sudden blaze. A thin, cautious seam of light. Dawn. It slid into the sky like a needle pulling thread through fabric, slow, measured, deliberate. The aurora's colors softened and shifted, making room. The lamplight in the streets below flickered again, then steadied as if accepting it didn't have to be the only light anymore. Rhovan stared upward, breath-shaking. He had forgotten what dawn looked like in motion. Not a memory in a shard. Not a story. Not a myth. A living change. Olis sank to her knees across the pool, hand still lifted in the weave, eyes wide and wet with something like relief she didn't know how to admit. "It's gentle," she whispered, sounding astonished. "It's gentle." Ysella let out a ragged laugh that turned into a shaky exhale. "Because we made it breathe," she murmured. The heart's hum deepened into something steady, no longer frantic, no longer hungry. The black pool beneath it rippled with reflected dawnlight, and the reflection didn't snap back into dusk. It held. Time held. Rhovan looked down at his wrist. The pale ink band was still there, but it no longer burned cold. It looked quiet, like a scar that had stopped being an open wound. He flexed his fingers slowly, testing reality. Nothing snapped. No reset clawed at the edges. He could feel the future, thin and uncertain, but real, waiting beyond the next breath. His eyes lifted to Ysella. She was pale, exhausted, and smiling like she couldn't decide if she wanted to cry or laugh. Her gold-flecked eyes held his with fierce tenderness. "It's tomorrow," she whispered, as if afraid the word might shatter. Rhovan's throat closed. He had endured so long that hope felt dangerous to touch. But Ysella was there, hand in his, and the sky was changing, and the city below would wake to a world that moved. He reached up slowly, carefully, and brushed his knuckles against her cheek, gentle, reverent, as if confirming she was real. Ysella leaned into the touch just a fraction, eyes fluttering shut for a heartbeat. Rhovan's voice came out rough. "You came back," he said, and it wasn't about the rift anymore. Ysella opened her eyes. "I told you," she whispered. "I wouldn't leave you." Behind them, Captain Sairn lowered his sword, staring up at the faint dawn as if he'd never seen it in his life, and maybe he hadn't. His jaw trembled, and he swallowed hard, blinked fast, like a man remembering something he'd never been allowed to keep. Calethorn stood rigid, face grey, watching his control unravel with the old day. He looked like a man who had built a life inside a cage and suddenly realized the door was open. Eld Brennicar appeared at the cathedral's edge, breathless, eyes wide with awe. He had followed, quietly, bravely, because he couldn't stay behind and pretend the archive mattered if the world never moved. He looked at the heart, then at the pale line of dawn, and his composure finally broke into a shaky, disbelieving smile. "It worked," he breathed. Olis remained on her knees, staring upward, the stern matron reduced to a woman who had held a burning sky at bay for too long. Her voice was thin. "If the dawnfall returns," she began, fear trying to reclaim her. Ysella's voice softened, not cruel, not triumphant. "Then we'll face it awake," she said. "Together. With time moving. With choices." Olis swallowed, and for the first time her gaze met Ysella's without coldness. "You are reckless," she whispered, but there was something like gratitude in it too. Ysella's mouth trembled into a tired, genuine smile. "Maybe," she admitted. "But I'm here." Rhovan squeezed Ysella's hand again, as if reminding himself that here was a place that finally had a meaning beyond repetition. They climbed back up into Evernight streets as dawn continued its slow, careful spread. The city's people began to pause in their routines, hesitating, blinking, lifting their faces toward a sky that was doing something it had not done in living memory. A bun seller froze mid-step, basket forgotten, eyes widening at the pale light. The boy with the chipped tooth stopped chasing her. He stared upward, mouth open, and then, softly, as if afraid, he laughed. It wasn't the same laughter as always. It rang different, freer, like a sound not yet worn into the stone. Rhovan's chest tightened painfully. He didn't know if he wanted to weep or breathe until his lungs ached. Ysella stood beside him, watching the city wake. "This is what you were trying to save," she whispered. Rhovan swallowed. "Yes," he said. "And this is what I almost forgot I deserved to live in." Ysella turned her face up to the dawn, and the new light caught the gold in her eyes. She looked at him then, truly looked, without urgency, without the pressure of a countdown bell. "We still have choices," she said, voice soft. "My world. Your world. What happens now?" Rhovan's throat tightened. He didn't reach for cleverness. He didn't reach for caution. He reached for honesty. "I want you here," he said, voice rough. "Not because I need saving. Because I want a life. With you in it." Ysella's breath caught. Her cheeks flushed faintly, and her eyes shone. Then she nodded once, fierce and sure. "Then we build it," she whispered. Slowly. Like dawn. Rhovan's hand lifted, hesitated for only a heartbeat, then settled at her shoulder, warm, steady. Ysella leaned into him, and he let himself hold her there, not in desperation, but in quiet certainty. Above them, the sky brightened another careful shade. And Evernight, no longer locked, became simply a city. A city with a tomorrow.